They say that family is the greatest blessing in life. But sometimes it can also be the source of our deepest wounds. My name is Angelica Rinaldi, and for years I have sincerely and wholeheartedly believed that all the sacrifices I have voluntarily made for my family, sleepless nights, worries, financial investments, and giving up my own dreams, will at some point be rewarded with gratitude, warm words, sincere love, and maybe even a simple cup of coffee at the kitchen table, at which they will say to me, "Thank you, Mom." But I was wrong. I was terribly, deeply, and, perhaps, irrevocably mistaken. Before we return to this topic, to the bottomless pit that a human heart can turn into if you put love into it for years but receive nothing in return, tell us where you are looking from now. Maybe from a small apartment overlooking a gray courtyard where your children used to play, or from the terrace of a country house filled with peace and the scent of lavender. I'm not telling this out of pity, or for likes or approval, but because I know there are people out there who will find my words echoing in their chests. If this story has touched you, don't forget to subscribe. Tomorrow I will tell you something special, and maybe you will also decide to look inside your own life. The moment when I realized the true nature of my relationship with my son and his wife was not loud, tragic, or theatrical. It happened quietly, almost casually, as if something ordinary but unbearably heavy was hanging in the air. It was not a forgotten birthday, not a request for help on the 5th weekend in a row, when, despite fatigue and lower back pain, I picked up my grandchildren, played with them, cooked food for them, told them stories, and put them to bed. No, it all happened when Beatrice, my sister-in-law, a beautiful, well-groomed, cold woman with perfect hair and a look devoid of warmth, looked me straight in the eye and said, "We think it would be better if you skipped Christmas with us this year. Luigi and Laura will be the hosts. And honestly, Angelica, you just don't fit in." These words, spoken calmly, almost gently, shattered something so important inside me that even breathing began to be difficult. After everything I'd done for them, after countless nights at the baby's bedside, after sacrificing all my retirement savings to help them buy their dream home, a house I didn't have the right to be a Christmas guest in right now, I was told that I didn't fit in, that I was a stranger in his own son's life. At that moment, a turning point occurred inside me, as quiet as the crunch of ice underfoot in January, and as final as the click of a lock on a closed door. I've decided that I've had enough. If I'm not a family member to sit at their holiday table, then I don't have to be a family member in order to continue paying for a roof over their heads. And what happened next changed everything, for them, and especially for me. I never expected my life to turn out this way. At the age of 62, I imagined myself surrounded by my grandchildren, peacefully working in the garden, growing roses, mint and maybe peppers, rolling jams, baking pies, wiping small hands and laughing at children's pranks. Instead, I found myself alone in a house that now seemed too big, too empty, too saturated with the voices of the past and the smells of those dinners that would never happen again. He kept decades of memories in himself, photos on the walls, faded toys, forgotten diaries, and all of a sudden it turned out not to be warmth, but mockery, a reminder that everything had happened, but would not happen again. My journey began in Abington, Pennsylvania, a place where everyone knew your grandmother's name, where the laundry and butcher's shop were on the same street, and even those who didn't believe went to church on Sunday. The city was big enough to have its own hospital, but small enough so that everyone knew who was meeting with whom. I started working as a nurse at St. Mary's Medical Center right after graduating from nursing school. I always wanted to be around those who were in pain. I wanted to help. It was there that I met Massimo, my husband, my colleague, my first and last ally in this life. He was a hospital administrator, tall, Italian, with impeccable manners and the kindest eyes imaginable. We got married when I was 23, he was 5 years older, and immediately bought a modest but cozy house on Maple Street, with white shutters, a maple tree in the yard, and plans for a large family. Life was different. We lost 2 children before they were even born. And only one, our long-awaited David, was born after many years of prayers, tears, and hopes. When I first picked him up, I promised myself that I would do anything for him. When he was diagnosed with severe asthma at the age of 3, I left night shifts and shifts to be around, monitor his breathing, listen to every breath, and run to the hospital at the slightest attack. Those anxious nights, when he slept, snuggled up to me, and I did not close my eyes, afraid that he would stop breathing. They forever connected us, as I thought at the time, with an inseparable thread. Massimo and I made every effort to provide David with a better life, even when it seemed that every new day required more from us than we could give, and every morning began not with coffee and silence, but with calculations. How much was left before paycheck? How to make it to the end of the month? What else could we do save up to save some money for his future? We drove a car with the driver's side door opening only the third time. We taped the wallpaper in the living room instead of gluing it, and when he expressed interest in computers, we didn't hesitate to take a vacation to give him his first desktop computer, albeit a used one. But it was the car he dreamed of, and it ignited in him the passion for technology that would later define his life. When, as a teenager, he wanted to go to a summer programming camp, where, as he assured me, real geniuses from Silicon Valley taught, I took extra shifts at the hospital without further ado, and although I had to sleep 3 hours a day and eat snacks standing between the wards, I felt that I was doing everything right. That every drop of my sweat is a step towards his dream. But Massimo never lived to see the moment when David, our boy, in a robe and with a diploma in his hands, stood on the university stage, and I, squeezed between the parents of other graduates, tried not to burst into tears, looking at his beaming face. My husband had a sudden and violent heart attack when David was only 20 years old and I was 44, and at that moment my soul seemed to crack in half, but I knew that I had no right to fall apart. I had no right to fall, for David's sake. The insurance barely covered the funeral expenses and the rest of the mortgage, and I had to pull myself together and go back on shift a few days after the funeral, because the bills were not waiting, and life, no matter how hard it beat, continued. About a month later, when the house was filled with silence, in which I thought I could hear Massimo breathing, David, returning one evening from class, cautiously said, "Mom, maybe you should sell the house? It's too big for you alone, and the money could help me pay for my tuition." I remember how everything inside me shrank from these words. It was our house, every corner of which was saturated with memories of Massimo. Every creak of the parquet floor knew his steps, every crack in the wall was the result of years of living. But I held back the tears because I understood. David didn't mean anything bad. He was thinking practically. He was grieving too, just in his own way. "This is our home, David," I told him softly. "Your father and I have worked so hard to keep him alive. And where will you come on vacation if I sell it?" Instead of putting the house up for sale, I started taking extra shifts again, working 60 hours a week, staying on duty at night when other nurses refused, and only occasionally allowing myself a cup of hot tea before going to bed. By the time David graduated in computer science, I was exhausted, but overwhelmed with pride. He was the first person in our family to graduate, and when he hugged me after the ceremony and said softly, "I did it, Mom. I couldn't have done it without you," these words became a reward for me, healing the pain of loss and the fatigue of all these years. He got a job at a technology company in our city, and I didn't even have to pretend to be happy. I was really overjoyed, because it meant that he would stay by my side. While he was settling in, I continued to work at the hospital, where Dr. Rafael Ruggiero, a widower who lost his wife to cancer, a serious, respected man, and at the same time surprisingly humane, became the new chief physician. He had no children, and over time we developed a special, quiet but deep professional bond. He always knew that he could rely on me, trusted me with difficult patients, praised me in front of colleagues and said more than once that I was the best nurse in his department. In David's second year at the company, he met Beatrice Parisi, a tall, graceful, always immaculately dressed young woman who possessed that self-confident grace that is rarely seen in girls her age. She was ambitious, worked in the marketing department, and, as it turned out later, came from a family that moved in completely different circles than us. Her father Luigi owned a chain of car dealerships. Her mother Laura became famous for her charity receptions, which gathered the entire local community. When David said to me one evening, "Mom, I want you to meet Sophia," of course, I was surprised. He misspoke, because her name was Beatrice, but apparently even he felt how far we were from each other. That evening, when he brought her to our house for the first time, she was polite but distant, and I noticed how she looked around our living room, walls covered with old photographs, armchairs with knitted capes, a ceramic vase that I made in my youth, and there was no curiosity in her gaze, and the condemnation. "You have an unusual house," she said with a slight, strained smile. and I suppressed the urge to respond with a taunt. Massimo and I bought it when we first got married. It's nothing special, but there's a lot of love in it. She nodded, but it was clear in her eyes. She considered this house outdated, unpresentable, and probably unacceptable for the person with whom she wants to build a future. When they announced their engagement, of course, I was happy for David. His eyes shone with happiness, and he spoke about the future with such hope that my worries receded for a while. I hugged Beatrice and tried my best to participate in the preparations for the wedding, although with each meeting I felt the tension building between us, as if we were on different frequencies, and even in the simplest conversations we could not find a common language. Angelica, Laura Parisi said during our first official meeting, which she organized in her exquisite, immaculately furnished living room filled with the aromas of expensive coffee and restrained but deliberately thoughtful hospitality, we have already booked the Westfield Country Club and hired the best wedding planner in the entire state, so we will take care of all organizational matters. You have nothing to worry about, dear. There was a confidence in her voice that suggested no objections, and at the same time a subtle patronage, as if she were talking to a maid who should be grateful for the opportunity to witness great preparations. I felt like a stranger in this conversation, like a casual witness to someone else's play, and yet I reminded myself that this was not about me, but about David and his happiness, about Beatrice, whom he loved, and therefore I offered to participate at least in organizing a rehearsal dinner. After all, this was the only detail to which I could still put my hand to. Oh, Laura said, glancing at Beatrice, and there was everything in that short interjection: surprise, condescension, and mild annoyance. We have already booked a rehearsal dinner at La Casa Bella. Luigi, you understand, has a special relationship with the owner. I see, I replied softly, trying to hide how everything inside me was getting cold from these words. Is there anything I can do to help? Beatrice, without looking up from the phone screen, put her well-groomed palm on my arm, as one puts a hand on a child's head, and said with a strained, formal smile, "We know that you want to contribute, Angelica. Maybe you could start assembling wedding souvenirs? It's not difficult, just ribbons, packaging." I suppressed my pride, the one I used to hide behind burning cheeks in my youth, and nodded. Isn't that what a mother's duty is, to support her child, even when every detail of that support reminds you that you are less and less in his world? The wedding was lavish, sparkling like a magazine cover. 7 bridesmaids in designer dresses with handmade embroidery, ice sculptures on every table, including a grand installation in the form of a white peacock, a live orchestra, which one of the guests whispered that he allegedly performed at the birthday of a famous actress. I came in my best dress, a blue, formal one, the one I wore to David's graduation, and which now seemed completely out of place in this luxury. I felt out of place, as if I had wandered into someone else's dream. David spent most of the reception with Beatrice's family. He was happy, cheerful, surrounded by attention and benevolent glances from new relatives, and only briefly came to my table, where I was sitting alone. "Are you okay, Mom?" "What is it?" he asked, and I noticed that his tie was slightly loosened and his hair was disheveled from dancing. "Of course, honey. Everything is fine. I'm so happy for you." He smiled with relief, and then said, "Beatrice's father is thinking of involving me in the business side of the company. He says I have potential not only as a programmer." It was really wonderful, and I sincerely wanted to be happy for him, but at the same time, there was a growing feeling inside that David was gradually moving away, disappearing into the orbit of the Parisi family, where my advice, my stories, and even my memories no longer had a place. After their honeymoon, they seriously started looking for their own home. One weekend, they invited me to go with them to see the house, a large colonial mansion with 4 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen with marble countertops and a huge backyard overlooking the sparkling lake in the morning light. "Isn't it wonderful, Mom?" David asked, and his eyes shone with the same delight with which he once looked at the packaging of his first computer. It was really wonderful, but knowing how much he earns, I couldn't help but ask myself the question, how are they going to pay for it? He still had student loans, and the job, even if prestigious, did not promise miracles. "That's great," I said, trying not to sound alarmed. "But, dear ones, are you sure that this fits into your budget?" Beatrice's smile widened. "My parents are helping with the down payment, a wedding gift, so to speak. We've calculated everything and we can handle it." I nodded, not knowing at the time that we meant much more in her mouth than I would like to think, and that very soon I would have to help them cope. About a month later, David called. His voice was strained, slightly guilty. "Mom, I'm sorry to ask, but we're in a bit of a jam. The property taxes were higher than we expected, plus furniture, a new car for Beatrice. How much do you need?" I asked without thinking. "5,000 will help us even things out," he replied, and I could hear the relief in his voice, as if he knew I wouldn't ask unnecessary questions. The next day, I withdrew money from my account, from the savings that I had been saving for a modest apartment for myself, something simple, convenient, easily serviced, where I could live in old age, surrounded by peace. It wasn't easy, but David needed me. And what else, if not this, matters to the mother? So a new practice began. Every few months, David called, with the same notes of guilt in his voice, and talked about a new temporary difficulty. Either the car needed repair, the repairs in the house were delayed, or an erroneous payment was suddenly written off from the account. I helped every time, even if it meant giving up a new coat, a vacation, or a dream of just living in peace. And here I am, remembering all this, telling you this story. If she responds to you, if you've ever felt the same way, please support us and subscribe. It means a lot. And now back to the story. The air conditioning system needed to be replaced, not because the old one had stopped working, but because the new model was quieter, more economical, and, as Beatrice put it, more aesthetically pleasing, because it did not spoil the facade lines like the old one, which protruded slightly outward. This was followed by a reduction in the company where she worked, and she urgently needed to take paid certification courses in order not to lose the opportunity for career growth. A little later, it turned out that the color of the parquet floors in their new house did not match the mood she wanted to feel in the morning, and therefore the old parquet, good, only slightly worn, was replaced with fashionable bleached oak, the price of which was equal to my 3-month salary. Each time, I dug deeper into my savings, which once seemed to me like a protective cushion in case my health faltered or my strength failed. Each time, David assured me that it was temporary, that everything would get better as soon as they got back on their feet, but each time the thank you calls became shorter, the words less sincere, and the breaks between requests less and less. Then came the evening that I still remember down to the smallest detail, the evening when David came to me alone, without a call, as in his youth, when he needed to cry into his vest. He sat down at my kitchen table, the very table where I helped him solve algebra problems, made his favorite pancakes on Saturdays, and where we planned how he would go to college. I knew this was going to be a difficult conversation even before he started fiddling with his wedding ring. "Mom," he said, and his voice trembled, "I need to talk to you about something serious. Beatrice and I are having difficulty paying off our mortgage. The interest rate has changed, as has everything else." My heart sank. I already knew where the conversation was going. "How far behind are you?" I asked, trying to stay calm. He looked down at his hands. 3 months. But it's not just that. Right now, this fee is too much for us. Beatrice's father has problems with his business, and they can no longer support us. I took a deep breath. "What are you asking for, David? Could you help with the mortgage at least for a while until I get a promotion or until Beatrice finds something more stable? We don't want to lose the house, Mom. We have made it our home." My home, these words echoed in my head, giving me no peace. The house, the one that I put all my efforts into to raise him, the one that he wanted to get rid of after his father died because it was too big. But I nodded. I couldn't bear the thought of my son, my blood, my only one, being left without a roof over his head, facing the humiliation of losing the real estate that meant so much to him. "I'll need to talk to Dr. Ruggiero to get extra hours," I said, already figuring out exactly how much I'd have to add to my already crowded schedule. I was 60, and night shifts were getting harder, my joints hurt more often, my heart was bothering more often, but I knew I could handle it. David's relief was almost palpable. "You're the best, Mom. I promise we'll get it all back as soon as we're back on solid ground." That evening, after he left, I sat alone in the kitchen, looking at the very vase I was making with Massimo, and calculating what it would mean for me. The payment on their mortgage in Lakeview was almost twice as high as I had ever paid for my own house. To cover this amount, I would have to give up the idea of retirement, postpone my quiet aging indefinitely, and cut even modest expenses. Goodbye books, cafes with friends, a new pair of comfortable shoes. But what choice did I have? He was my son. My boy. My last connection with Massimo. The next day, I went into Dr. Ruggiero's office, where he was looking at his computer notes, and I said, "Doctor, I need to take extra shifts." He immediately raised his head and looked at me with obvious concern. "Angelica, you're already working more than you should for someone your age. Is everything okay?" I smiled and lied, "It's okay. I just want to save up a little for retirement." He didn't seem to believe me, but he respected me too much to ask unnecessary questions. "I can send you to the cardiac intensive care unit. People are always needed there. But promise me that you will take care of yourself." I promised. Although I knew that it would be almost impossible to keep this promise. So began the new years of my life, the years during which I paid the mortgage to David and Beatrice without complaint, without reproach. Every month, I transferred the required amount directly to their account, denying myself everything. I skipped meals in the hospital cafeteria to save a couple of dollars, postponed much, needed repairs in my own house, ignored the dashboard lights on a car that was already 12 years old, and increasingly declined invitations from my friends if they suggested even the slightest expense. Even going to the movies was becoming a luxury. All for their sake. For David's sake. For the sake of believing that family is primarily about support. During this time, my relationship with David and Beatrice gradually and imperceptibly began to change. No, not in a minute, not suddenly, not by a quarrel or a sharp gesture, but with a kind of painful gradualness, like water sharpening a stone. At first, weekly Sunday dinners, so important to me, turned into monthly, then in rare, spontaneous meetings, as if an invisible curtain had appeared between us, through which they reached out less and less often. The phone calls became shorter, and David's voice carried a polite but distant urgency, while Beatrice now answered only briefly and dryly, and almost never asked how I was feeling or how I was living. When I went to their house, the one for which I had paid the mortgage, depriving myself of the most basic necessities, I could not help but notice the changes. Everything was renovated, decorated with taste and generosity, new paintings, vases, furniture, everything testified that there was no need for anything in this house. Except, perhaps, for my presence. "The new sectional cabinet is great," I said one day, looking at the elegant furniture, which was obviously custom made and probably cost more than my entire kitchen. "It's from the showroom downtown," Beatrice said casually, flipping through something on her tablet. "We decided that we deserve a little pampering. Mental health is important, you know." I nodded and bit my tongue, remembering how I taped off the bathroom faucet last night, because calling a plumber meant losing dinner for 3 days. That evening, as I was leaving their house, I accidentally overheard Beatrice talking on the phone, and when I heard her name, I involuntarily froze in place. "I know, Mom," she said irritably. "It's exhausting, constantly involving her in everything. But David feels obligated, you know? At least she helps financially." My cheeks flushed with shame and humiliation, as if I was eavesdropping on something forbidden, and yet I wanted to scream, "I'm paying off your entire mortgage, sacrificing myself, and you call it helping financially?" But I left in silence, feeling everything grow cold inside. The real turning point came a week before Thanksgiving. I had been struggling with a lingering cough for several weeks now, which was getting weaker and then getting worse again, and all the time I hoped that it would go away on its own, as always, as before. I continued to go on shifts, get up at night to patients, change sheets, serve water, smile, even when my legs were buzzing with fatigue. So one evening, when I was leaning against the nurse's post, trying to catch my breath after just climbing the stairs, Dr. Ruggiero came up to me. "That's it, Angelica," he said with that firm concern that brooked no argument. "I'll order a chest X-ray right now." The next day, the diagnosis was confirmed: pneumonia with complications caused by exhaustion and weakened immune system. "You need to rest," the doctor said, looking into my eyes. "Complete peace, and immediately. I'm sending you on sick leave for at least 4 weeks." I objected, thinking about the mortgage payment that was due in 2 weeks, but he was adamant. It's not up for discussion, Angelica. Your health comes first. And so, for the first time in so many years, I stayed in my bed, not to sleep between shifts, but because I needed it myself. Lying under a warm blanket, listening to the rain slowly trickle down the windowsill, for the first time I thought not about other people's needs, but about my own. And then, with difficulty, I got up and dialed David's number, deciding to talk honestly and directly, to explain the situation and ask if they would be able to take over the mortgage payment for at least a month or two while I was recovering. Beatrice answered the phone. Angelica, she said in a cold, almost indifferent tone. David is in a meeting. Can I send a message? It's important, Beatrice. I need to talk to him about paying the mortgage. There was a pause. Mortgage payment? What do you mean? I'm on sick leave, pneumonia. I won't be able to work for at least a few weeks. That's why I was hoping that you and David would be able to cover the mortgage until I get back on my feet. There was a long, sticky silence, and I was about to repeat it when I suddenly heard on the phone, I heard you, and her voice suddenly became dry, like the crunch of ice. So you're saying that you won't send the money this month? These words, spoken with such confidence, as if the monthly transfers had become my contractual obligation rather than a voluntary sacrifice, hurt me more deeply than I could have expected. I can't, Beatrice. I'm sick. The doctor insists on rest. We were counting on this money, Angelica, she interrupted with cold irritation. We have plans. We've already booked a ski trip to Vermont for the Christmas holidays. A cold wave of realization washed over me, slow, viscous, and merciless, like icy water in which it was impossible to breathe. They had money for a ski vacation, for booking a chalet in Vermont, for renting equipment, for the latest model of skis, for photos with snow-white peaks, which they would surely share on their social networks, and they didn't have the money to cover just one monthly mortgage payment, which I had been paying for 3 years. I've been paying your mortgage for 3 years now, I said softly, as if saying it out loud had made me fully realize the scale of this sacrifice for the first time. I think you and David can somehow hold out for a month while I recover from pneumonia. Her laugh was short, dry, with that note of disdain that seemed to shake even my bones. That's right. Because it certainly makes up for everything David did for you after Massimo's death. I froze, and an almost silent question sounded in my head. What? It sounded like a blow, like a tiny explosion in his chest. He told me, she continued, and her voice became a little more confident, with the same smug tone that I had heard from Laura on the day we first met, how you completely fell on him after the death of your husband, how he became your only support when he himself was only 20 years old. How he stayed nearby and went to college nearby just because you couldn't handle being alone. Every word sounded like a slap in the face, a rude, unfair, distorted truth beyond recognition, from which everything was cut out that I gave, sacrificed, how I hid my grief, my fatigue, my pain, so that David could go forward, feel strong and free. That's not true, Beatrice, I whispered, feeling a lump rise in my throat. I held on for him. I worked nights so he could study. Everything I did was for him to follow his dream. Listen, she said with that artificial politeness that only accentuates indifference. We all understand that you're helping with the mortgage because you want to participate in our lives. It is okay. But you should not use your health as a way of pressure. For a moment, I was speechless, so paradoxical did this statement seem to me. In what universe can paying someone else's mortgage be considered a desperate attempt to impose my presence? I finally found the strength to answer, please let David call me back. Of course, she said, and the connection was cut. But David didn't call that evening or the next, and it wasn't until 3 days later, when I'd almost given up hope, that I heard his voice on the phone, hurried, distant, not the voice I remembered, not the one he'd once spoken to. Mom, without you, I couldn't have done it. Mom, he began, Sophia told me about your conversation. I'm sorry you're not feeling well, really, but you do understand that we need this money. We are planning to host a dinner for Beatrice's colleagues before the holidays, and we have already ordered new furniture for the dining room. David, I said slowly, and my voice was surprisingly steady, despite how painful it was to hear it. I've been paying off your mortgage for 3 years now. That's 3 years of extra shifts, 3 years when I skipped meals, postponed home repairs, and didn't buy myself a winter coat. Right now, I'm only asking for a little time to recover from an illness that, if you're not aware, could end up not only in the hospital, but also something worse. There was silence on the other end of the line, and I thought he had interrupted the call when he suddenly spoke. "So you're tracking all this? What is it?" he asked, and in his voice there was what I was most afraid of: annoyance, reproach, accusation. "I thought you were helping because you want to, not because you expect something in return." Those words hit me like a blow, as if someone had ripped out my heart and squeezed it. "I don't expect anything in return, David," I whispered. "Except, maybe, basic respect. And a little concern about my health." "Of course I'm worried," he said, but his tone said otherwise. "It's just that now is not the best time. The holidays are coming, we have obligations." "Obligations?" I asked again. "Are commitments more important than a mother's health?" He sighed, and it was a heavy, unhappy sigh that foreshadowed annoyance. "Let's not be dramatic, Mom. Listen, I'll see what we can do. Maybe we can send you half this month." "Half of it? After everything? After all these years?" "Don't worry," I said, and for the first time in a long time, my heart didn't contract, but straightened out, as if a weight had been lifted from it. "I'll figure something out." After we hung up, I sat in silence, in my cold house, among the things, each of which held memories of the love I had once lived with, and at that moment I truly saw my situation for the first time. I gave everything to my son, who considered my sacrifices to be due, the norm, something taken for granted. I spent all my savings to support his family, forgetting about myself, forgetting who I am. I made myself sick for the sake of people who, while I taped off the tap, discussed which restaurants they would go to after skiing trips. I realized that something needed to be changed. Profoundly, cardinally, and this change should not begin with them. And with me. The next day, despite the weakness that still shackled my body, as if shrouding my movements and thoughts in a veil, I made 2 calls that, as I now understand, marked the beginning of a new chapter in my life, calls in which, for the first time in many years, there was not the usual voice of resignation, but a quiet but determined "that's enough." The first was a call to the bank, where I gathered my willpower and politely but confidently asked to stop the automatic transfer to David and Beatrice's account, the same payment that left my account every month, as if it were some kind of law of nature that did not require discussion. The manager on the other end of the line clarified whether there had been an error, whether it was worth waiting until next month. After all, judging by the transfer history, it was a regular transaction, but I remained calm, thanked him and insisted on canceling. The second call was even more unusual for me. I dialed the number of my old friend Eliza Thompson, the one who for years had been trying to persuade me to join her volunteer group, hold literary evenings, lead clubs for the elderly at the community center, and whom I kept putting off for later, always citing work, fatigue, lack of time. "Angelica Rinaldi," Eliza exclaimed happily as soon as she picked up the phone. "To what do I owe this pleasure? I'm wondering if your offer to join your book club is still relevant." I asked, surprised at how light and free my voice sounded, as if something trapped in me had finally gotten a breath. "Always," she replied enthusiastically. "We meet on Thursdays at the library." "But don't you work in the evenings?" "Not anymore," I said simply. "I'm going to make some changes." Over the next 2 weeks, while I was recovering from pneumonia, my body gradually gained strength and my soul gained clarity, and, strangely enough, for the first time in many years, I felt that I was not living on someone else's schedule, but on my own. I started reading books that had been sitting on my shelves for years, covered with the dust of waiting. I invited Eliza to tea, and we laughed, remembering our school years, and shared stories that we had never had time to exchange before. I even called my sister Paula in Ohio, the one I hadn't spoken to in months because I was too busy, too tired, too fixated on other people's needs. And so, the day before Thanksgiving, when the sky was leaden and the wind was piercing through, the doorbell rang. David stood in the doorway, disheveled, exhausted, with faded eyes and in a rumpled coat that I once gave him for his birthday. His face was tense, and he was clutching his phone in his hands, as if it could save the situation right now. Mom, he said, without even really greeting me, there's been some kind of mistake with the mortgage payment. The bank informs you that the transfer has been cancelled. I stepped aside to let him enter the house, noticing that he never once asked how I was feeling, did not comment on my obvious thinness, did not look into my eyes with concern. We went into the living room, where I put the kettle on and sat down in front of him. It wasn't a mistake, David, I said calmly. I deliberately cancelled the transfer. He stared at me in disbelief. What? Why did you do that? Because I can't pay your mortgage anymore, I replied. Now I'm focused on myself, on my health, on my future. His face turned red, and his lips twitched with anger. It couldn't just be solved without warning. We have obligations based on this money. Did you enjoy the ski trip? I asked quietly. He averted his eyes, lowering his head in shame, but only for a moment before he stood up and said, "It's not fair. We work hard and deserve a vacation. And I deserve a pension, David. I deserve the right to grow old with dignity. I deserve to live without joint pain from night shifts and without anxiety for every dollar. And I deserve my son to treat me with respect." He ran a hand through his hair, clearly annoyed, at a loss for words. "That's not like you, Mom. You've always been there for me, you've always been supportive. And by the way, I'm always there for you emotionally. But financially, you said yourself that it's time for you to focus on yourself. So we need to focus on ourselves, too. We'll figure it out on our own. But don't expect us to change our lives for you if you're being so selfish." The word hung selfishly between us like thick smoke, like a spit in the face. "Tomorrow is Thanksgiving," I said, trying to change the subject, holding out another twig, even though I knew it would be broken. "Will I see you and Beatrice?" He shook his head, not meeting my eyes. "We're going to Parisi's. Sophia's mom is cooking, she's waiting for us." "I understand," I said. "And Christmas, too," he added after a pause. "This year, Beatrice's parents will be hosting guests at their home. Mostly their friends, their families. Beatrice thinks, and so do I, that you might be uncomfortable there. And here it is. After everything I've sacrificed, after endless years during which my own desires took a back seat to the needs of others, after sleepless nights, sacrifices, rejections of vacations, new shoes, a repair crew, and simple joys like Sunday apricot pie, which I no longer baked because everything Sundays had long since ceased to be family days, and after all that, I wasn't even welcome at their Christmas table." "Awkward," I repeated after him, and the word, so neutral and harmless in other circumstances, now felt bitter, like wormwood stuck in my throat. "It's nothing personal," David said, backing out the door, avoiding my gaze as if it were a mirror he didn't want to see himself in. "It's just a different audience. You wouldn't like it anyway." But it was personal. It was deeply, painfully personal. It doesn't matter how he tried to discount it. "I understand," I said, although to be honest, I didn't. "Not quite. Not fully. I hope you will have a wonderful vacation." And I really hoped so. Not because I wanted to please them, but because I wanted to stop feeling pain. When he left, I stood in the doorway for a long time, looking at the empty space where his car had been a second ago. The void she left behind was frighteningly symbolic. 34 years of motherhood, every morning, every night, every compromise, every prayer, every step, all for him. And that's what we came to. I was called an egotist for not working my ass off, not pushing myself to the point of exhaustion in order to continue paying for other people's decisions, other people's choices, someone else's life. I wasn't invited to Christmas dinner because I didn't fit into their new life, the one I helped build at my own cost. That evening, I received a message from Beatrice. Short, prickly. "David told me about your decision. We are very disappointed. I thought you cared about our family. I guess now we know where we stand." I didn't answer. Instead, I made another decision, the first real decision I've made in a long time. A decision that will change everything. The next morning, when the world was just beginning to wake up, gray, quiet, autumn dank, Instead of staying at home and feeling sorry for myself for the lost illusions, I went to the community center, where Eliza organized a festive lunch for the elderly, who had nowhere to go that day. I didn't warn her, I just came because I decided to. Her face lit up when she saw me on the doorstep, wearing my old but neat coat and with determination in her eyes. "Angelica. What is it?" she exclaimed. "I didn't expect to see you today." "I've changed my plans," I replied calmly. She didn't ask unnecessary questions, didn't ask why I wasn't with my family, didn't offer comfort. She just handed me an apron and said, "Well, we're glad to see you. The mashed potatoes need to be mixed." For the first time in many years, I felt like I was part of something real, something sincere. I sat at the festive table with those who were grateful just for the food, for the attention, for the smile, for the human warmth. There was no need to walk on tiptoe, to be afraid of hurting someone's pride, to weigh every word. No one here appreciated your dress or accent, or asked how much you earn. They were accepted here. Just like that. When I drove home in the evening, through the darkness and rain, I felt warm and calm. That feeling of peace that I hadn't known for years finally caught up with me. And with it, clarity. I knew what I had to do next. On the Monday after Thanksgiving, early in the morning, I called the law office that had been recommended to me many years ago when I was arranging Massimo's inheritance. The secretary's calm voice said that Fidel Goldstein, the old lawyer who had helped me so much at the time, was still working and could see me on the same day. Fidela's office turned out to be exactly as I remembered it: tall bookshelves, leather armchairs, the constant smell of fresh coffee, and the sense of confidence and reliability that always emanated from him. I entered, and he stood up, smiling his unchanging, warm smile. "Angelica," he said, coming up to me. "It's been too long. What can I do for you?" I settled into a chair, and although my heart was pounding, my hands were shaking, and my voice sounded uncertain at first, I told her everything: how I paid the mortgage on my son and his wife's house for 3 years, how I withdrew money from my retirement savings, how I worked despite my fatigue and age, how my illness opened my eyes to reality, and how now I want to legally protect my interests. Fidel nodded, made notes, clarified the details, and I kept talking, restrained, clearly, but with that inner pain that it is impossible to hide. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen on his notebook. "Let me get this straight," he said. "You transferred money directly to the mortgage lender, but no agreements were signed between you and your son, right?" "That's right," I nodded. "It was a verbal agreement that someday, when it gets easier for them, they will repay the debt." "And how much have you paid in these 3 years?" I looked at the notebook where I had written out the amount with a pen the day before. $126,000. Fidel raised his eyebrows. "This is a very substantial sum, Angelica. And you're saying that you've been withdrawing money from your retirement savings?" I nodded, feeling a surge of shame, as if admitting my mistakes and naivety left a shadow on my face that neither the lamplight nor a flat voice could hide. "Yes, I took extra shifts at the hospital, seized every opportunity to earn money, even if I had to be on duty at night when other nurses refused, even if my legs were buzzing and my heart was pounding with fatigue, but even that wasn't enough. I've used up almost all of my non-retirement savings, the ones I've been saving up for years in case my health falters or I need urgent help, or just to avoid being a burden to David when I get really old." "I understand," Fidel said softly, leaning forward, his voice steady but caring. "From a legal point of view, if you did not have a written agreement, these transfers can be interpreted as gifts, not as loans." He paused, watching my reaction, and apparently saw how I cringed upon hearing that word. "However," he continued, "we could try to argue for an implied contract based on the regularity of payments and verbal understanding, especially if you have any written confirmation, text messages, emails, anything where these payments are discussed or obligations are mentioned." "What options do I have?" I asked, and at that moment my fingers curled into fists on my lap. "You can sue for repayment," he said slowly. "But it will be a long, financially costly and, most likely, emotionally destructive process. I must warn you that he may ruin your relationship with your son forever." He paused, then added, "Or you can just stop making payments, as you have already done, and let them deal with the consequences themselves. In both cases, you have every right to protect your interests. The thought that I would have to sue my own son didn't just seem better to me. It caused a painful response in my chest, as if some remnant of maternal love and trust, despite everything, still resisted. I don't want to sue David, I said quietly. I just want to protect what I have left for my future. I want to make sure that if I get worse tomorrow, I'll have a roof over my head, food in the fridge, and I won't have to beg for help. Fedel nodded, a look of understanding on his face. In that case, I strongly recommend that you document everything, every transaction, every payment, any correspondence mentioning payments, all evidence that this was not a unilateral assistance, but an agreement, even if it was tacit. It is important. If claims are made against you in the future, this documentation will help you defend yourself. Do you think they can do it? I hope not, he said softly, but in 30 years of work, I've seen money turn the most loving relatives into strangers. There are times when the person you raised and loved starts believing that you owe him something. He paused, then, with a slight worry in his voice, added, There's another aspect, Angelica. You mentioned that your name does not appear on the mortgage loan. It's good. But could you clarify, have you signed any additional obligations, for example, as a guarantor? My heart made a sharp leap, as if anticipating what he was leading to. I'm not registered in the mortgage, but a year ago, David and Beatrice were asked to sign documents to approve a credit line secured by their house. Beatrice said they were needed for repairs. I was the sponsor. Fedel tensed up. In this case, if they are unable to service this loan, the bank may require you to pay the entire amount. What was the amount of the credit line? 50,000, I whispered. He sighed. Then I recommend contacting the bank immediately and checking the status of this credit line. If the funds have been used, you should consider early repayment to avoid increasing debt and maintain your credit history. I left Fedel's office with the clear understanding that I needed to act. No illusions, no hopes for a miracle. Just me, the facts, and my plan. But my heart felt heavy, as if I had just buried a part of myself that lived solely for the sake of others. My first stop was the bank where the credit line was opened. After confirming my identity as a guarantor, the employee, polite and discreet, extracted all account information from the system. The current balance is $48,622, she said, turning the monitor in my direction. My chest tightened. Almost the entire amount has been used. When was the last transaction? She scrolled through several screens. November 15th, $12,000 was withdrawn. I closed my eyes. The 15th of November. A few days before they told me that I didn't fit into their Christmas plans and booked their ski vacation. I want to pay off this balance and close the account, I said. My voice was firmer than I expected, but my hands were shaking. The employee raised her eyebrows. The rest of it? This is a significant amount. I understand. I will transfer the funds from the retirement account. The process of completing all the paperwork, including early withdrawal of funds, confirmation of identity, and closing, took almost 2 hours. The fines were substantial, and the amount I lost due to the early withdrawal of funds from my retirement account made me physically tremble, as if my body, realizing how much I had bled my own future, responded with an instinctive protest. But Fedel made it clear that the alternative was to remain financially connected with David and Beatrice, to be hostage to their decisions, their habits of living beyond their means and counting on my help. It could have cost me much more in the long run. And perhaps not only in money, but also in the remnants of mental balance that I was so fragile restoring. As I drove home, my hands on the steering wheel a little tighter than usual, I was overcome by a strange and unexpected calm, as if my mind, having finally gained control of the situation, allowed my body and heart to rest a little. I had just sacrificed almost all of my remaining retirement savings to protect myself from my own son's financial decisions, and the pain of this reality was so acute, so searing, that at some point it turned into a stupor, as if the psyche had decided, enough is enough, we'll get over it later. When I entered the house, the walls of which now seemed a little strange, a little empty, despite the warmth of the lamp and the scent of lavender from a dried bouquet on the windowsill, I saw on the phone 3 missed calls from David and 1 message. We need to discuss the mortgage situation as soon as possible. Call me. I put the phone on the dresser without answering. I needed time to process what had happened before I entered into a conversation that was sure to be filled with demands, reproaches, and a nagging feeling that I had let someone down, even though in fact the only person I had let down for years was myself. That evening, wrapped in a warm cardigan and sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of strong tea and a notebook, I began to calculate my financial situation, like a person who has just returned from the battlefield and is now assessing the losses. After paying off the loan secured by the house, I had about $20,000 left, an amount that would hardly cover a year of the most modest expenses if I stopped working altogether. My hospital pension was supposed to start only at the age of 65, and yes, it would provide a stable but very modest income. The only asset I had that could help me was my house, and the irony was that I had been carefully maintaining it all these years, hoping one day to leave it to David so that he would have a home, even when I was gone. And now everything pointed to the fact that I might have to sell this particular house to ensure a peaceful old age. I couldn't help thinking that my whole life, my entire motherhood, all my efforts had been reduced to being in a situation where I had to save myself from the consequences of kindness. The phone rang again. David. This time I answered. Mom, finally, he said with annoyance in his voice. I've been trying to reach you all day. I've had meetings, I replied, restrained, without excuses. Well, we need to discuss the mortgage. Yesterday was the day of payment, and the bank sent a notification about the delay. This will affect our credit. Yes, that's what I thought. He paused, probably surprised by my calmness. So will you send the payment or not? No, David. I won't pay for your mortgage anymore, I said calmly but firmly. As I said last week, I'm currently focused on my financial security. Mom, you can't just... He stopped, and I heard the notes in his voice that I remembered from his teenage years, when he asked for something that I couldn't give him. Look, I know you're upset about Christmas, but it's a Beatrice family tradition. We're not intentionally excluding you. But that's exactly what you're doing, I whispered, and my voice trembled not with anger, but with sadness. Beatrice bluntly told me that I didn't fit into her parents' society. That's not what she meant. He protested. It's just that everything is different with them. They're more formal. More formally than the woman who raised you, who denied herself everything to pay for your college, who paid for 3 years of your mortgage, while you and Beatrice renovated the parquet and went to Vermont. Is this woman not formal enough to sit at your Christmas table? There was no response. The silence lasted longer than I expected, and it was this pause that spoke louder than any excuse. David, I continued, and my voice became softer, almost maternal, like it had been when he was a child. I love you. You're my son, and that's not going to change. But our relationship has become unhealthy. You and Beatrice need to learn how to take responsibility. And I have to take care of myself. The mortgage is now your responsibility, not mine. I've already made sacrifices you don't even know I'm making to protect myself. Today I paid off the credit line that I was vouching for. What are you doing? His voice became loud. Why would you do that? Because I was the sponsor, I said firmly. And I couldn't afford for your financial problems to ruin my credit history and leave me with nothing. We were not going to default. We just needed some flexibility before the holidays were over, David said, and despite his outward confidence, I detected nervousness in his voice, as if he didn't fully believe what he was saying. I closed my eyes, suddenly feeling the fatigue that had accumulated over the years, now that I had finally stopped fighting for the survival of other people's priorities, fell on me with all its weight. David, I said, 2 weeks ago you withdrew $12,000 from that very line of credit. Was it related to your ski vacation? Or with the new furniture for the dining room? He didn't answer right away, and that silence, filled with awkwardness, said more than any words. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded defensive. We needed this furniture for receiving guests. Beatrice's boss is coming to visit us next month. It's important for her career. Is it more important than your mother's financial security? I asked, and there was no anger or irony in my voice, just weariness. Is it more important than treating me with basic respect? It's not fair, he said sharply. You're distorting everything. We appreciate what you've done, but you can't keep it in our hands forever. The phrase "what you did" seemed to me almost insulting in its superficiality. Did he really think that my long-term sacrifice was just something I did, as an impulse, as a one-time effort, and not years, not life, not health, not savings, not night shifts, not deferred desires? It's not about what I did, I said, but about what I paid a great personal price for. I'm not holding anything over you, David. I'm just stating the facts. I supported you financially while you were an adult. And now I'm backing off. How you will manage your money is now your business. That's all. You're just turning us off, he blurted out, the childish resentment in his voice again, with which he spoke when I refused him another toy because there was barely enough for food. I'm putting my own needs first, I said calmly, after decades of putting yours first. This is not a shutdown. It's called setting boundaries, David. Soon, the conversation came to an end. David was still visibly upset, his voice trembling with suppressed irritation, but I sensed a note of recognition in his tone, as if he was beginning to realize that this time he would not be able to convince me. When the phone stopped ringing, I remained sitting in the kitchen, staring at the wall calendar on which I circled Christmas with a red marker a few months ago, anticipating how I would spend it with my family, with warm light, the smell of cinnamon and laughter, and realized how naive these expectations were. The next morning, I received a text from Beatrice. David told me what you did. Paying off a loan without prior discussion with us is manipulation and control. We had plans for this money. That's why we need personal space right now. I read the message twice in disbelief, amazed at how much resourcefulness it took to present my act of responsibility and protection of my rights as a tool of manipulation. I didn't answer. Instead, I put on my coat, tied a scarf, and drove to the hospital to talk to Dr. Ruggiero about a possible return to work. My pneumonia improved significantly, and my breathing became smoother, but I still felt my strength draining away too quickly, and I knew that the old schedule, with its sleepless nights and endless shifts, was no longer possible. Not because I can't do it, but because I no longer have to do it at the cost of my health for the sake of other people's ambitions. Dr. Ruggiero greeted me in his office with the expression on his face that I knew well. He saw me coming in after shifts, how tired I was, how I was holding up, and now there was the same concern in his eyes that he never voiced out loud until I spoke myself. Angelica, he said, getting up, you look better, but you're still not okay. Are you sure you're ready to come back? Not to the old schedule, I answered honestly. I was hoping that we could discuss the possibility of part-time employment. Fewer shifts, daytime hours, possibly administrative work. He nodded thoughtfully. I think we can arrange that. You may be able to keep records, 3 days a week, without night shifts. The salary will be lower. That's great, I interrupted. I've reviewed my finances. It's time to prepare for retirement. He nodded silently, then, after a moment's hesitation, said, May I be frank, Angelica? Of course. I've been worried about you for a long time. The hours you worked were excessive, even for the young. But you've always held on. And yet, he hesitated, I've noticed that your son almost never visits you, even when you're working on holidays. Even when you get off shift in the morning. Embarrassment washed over her like a wave. Was my life, my inner pain, so obvious to others? David has his own life, I replied, but the words sounded so empty that even I was embarrassed. Dr. Ruggiero's gaze was warm but piercing, as it always was when he saw through a person what he himself did not want to admit. Have we been working together for how many years? 15. He said. In all this time, I have never seen anyone who would give so much and ask so little in return. I didn't know how to respond. It was unusual and awkward to feel both gratitude for a kind word and a strange embarrassment, as if Dr. Ruggiero's praise had not only illuminated something in me that I hadn't allowed myself to see for a long time, but also cast a shadow over my son's actions that I didn't want to acknowledge. I was uncomfortable with both his kind eyes and his insight, because they reminded me of how long I had allowed myself to be invisible, even to myself. If you're interested, the administrative position will start operating next week, he continued, noticing my pause and apparently deciding to change the subject to a more neutral one. Devote the rest of the week to rest and complete recovery. I thanked him, about to leave the office, when he added, smiling a little more gently, "Oh, yes, Angelica, our annual Christmas party at the hospital will be held on the 23rd. I really hope that you will join us this year, because you usually work this evening." A simple phrase, uttered without any pressure, with the same natural warmth with which he once informed me about the change of my schedule to a less exhausting one, evoked in me a response so unexpected and fragile that I could barely hold back tears. It was not just a courtesy, it was a sign that I was remembered, appreciated, and expected. "I'd really like that," I replied, before hurriedly nodding and leaving his office. The next 2 weeks were surprisingly quiet. I gradually got into a new rhythm. The administrative work at the hospital, which I initially reacted to with concern, turned out to be not only less physically exhausting, but also unexpectedly intellectually intense. I felt again that my knowledge and experience were in demand, that I was not just on duty, but participating in something meaningful. I started attending Eliza's book club in the library and once even helped her at the community center, where we organized a collection of warm clothes for the homeless together. I put sweaters neatly into boxes, feeling the feeling of belonging to life slowly returning, which is not limited to waiting for a call from my son. David called twice more. The conversations became more and more tense. I could hear the anxiety growing in his voice, as the reality he had refused to listen to for so long began to break his usual picture of the world. "We may have to sell the house," he said for the last time, and there was a mixture of resentment, fear, and the still, alive hope in his voice that I would change my mind at the last moment and save them. "It might be the most sensible option," I replied calmly. "You could find something within your means." "This is our house," he protested. "We've invested so much, and what will Beatrice's family think?" I held back the answer, even though it was already bursting from my lips, a reminder that it was the desire to meet their expectations that led them to their current situation. "David," I said softly, "there are worse things than moving into a house that you can really afford." "That's easy for you to say," he muttered. "You've lived in the same house for 30 years. "Yes," I replied, "in a house that your father and I could afford with our salaries. We didn't throw expensive parties or take out furniture loans for the sake of the experience. We lived within our means. It was our choice. And he didn't make us any less worthy people." The conversation ended with him saying abruptly, "We'll figure it out ourselves." It's like that's exactly what I've been preventing them from doing all these years, when in fact I've been trying, in vain, to convince them of the need for independence from the very beginning. After that, I didn't hear from either him or Beatrice for several days. This silence was unusual, but not painful. On the contrary, it gave me the opportunity to focus on myself, on recovery, both physically and emotionally. The distance that used to cause me anxiety now became the space where I could breathe. I began to see the structure of our relationship more clearly. For years I allowed them to live without consequences, taking on their debts, their mistakes, their whims, and for years I was pushed out of their lives. All I had to do was silently sign checks. Love, as I understood it, ceased to be a bond. It became a duty. And I decided that I was no longer ready to pay that price. And so, a week before Christmas, on an evening when the city was slowly sinking into winter twilight, and the houses next door were already beginning to twinkle with garlands, the doorbell rang. I approached cautiously, not expecting anyone. Luigi Parisi was standing on the porch. I recognized him immediately, although in all the years of David's marriage to Beatrice, he hardly said more than a couple of polite phrases to me. A man with immaculately combed graying temples, wearing an expensive cashmere coat and leather gloves. He held himself erect, with the measured confidence of a man accustomed to being listened to. "Mrs. Rinaldi," he said with a dry nod. "May I come in? We have something to discuss." A little stunned, I stepped back, letting him inside. His steps on my creaking carpet seemed almost insultingly balanced to me. "Can I get you some tea or coffee?" I asked, clinging to the remnants of formal hospitality. "No, thank you." "It won't take long," he replied, and remained standing, looking around the living room with the same subtle disapproval that I had once seen in his daughter's eyes. It was clear that he didn't need my treats, he needed control. "What can I do for you, Mr. Parisi?" I asked. He clasped his hands behind his back, assuming a pose in which authority was immediately felt. He reminded me of the headmaster of an elite private school preparing to scold a student for impertinence, and this barely concealed arrogant gesture made the air in my own living room seem a little less warm. "I understand that you have decided to stop financially supporting the family of David and Beatrice," he said with the measured clarity with which disciplinary penalties are read out. The way he phrased it, it sounded like I had irresponsibly abandoned my responsibilities, as if I had stopped paying alimony without warning, rather than acting as any reasonable person would have done, whose patience, resources, and health had reached a critical point. "I've decided to focus on my own financial security," I corrected calmly, keeping my voice from trembling and trying not to betray how humiliating his introduction seemed to me. "David and Beatrice are adults, working people, fully capable of managing their own finances." Luigi pursed his lips, and his gaze became even colder. "Anyway, your decision has created significant difficulties for them. The timing is particularly unfortunate, given the upcoming holidays and the various social obligations they have committed to fulfill." I stared at him, not trying to hide my surprise. He was getting to the bottom of it, of course, and I didn't need to be a seer to understand that in his eyes what had happened wasn't about the destruction of trust between mother and son or the irresponsibility of spouses, but only the inconvenience it caused in the carefully structured social life of their family. "Beatrice is very upset," he continued, clearly trying to emphasize the word, as if his daughter's emotions were supposed to be a weighty argument for me. "She told me that you not only stopped paying the mortgage, but also repaid and closed the credit line they were counting on." "I paid off the credit line for which I was legally responsible as a guarantor," I clarified. "I was protecting my credit history and my rights, Mr. Parisi." He waved his hand, as if it were not about legitimate protection, but about a whim. "Is it legal?" "Maybe. You were probably technically right. But you certainly understand what an awkward position this puts them in socially. They made plans, assumed obligations, counting on a certain financial flow. A stream whose source is me, a 60-year-old woman working a 60-hour week?" I asked the question cautiously, but there was a hardness in my voice that I didn't try to hide. A thread suggesting that I should devalue my own life for the sake of their social events? Luigi looked as if he realized for the first time that this was not just David's mother, but a man with boundaries. "No one expected you to wear yourself out, Mrs. Rinaldi," he said, trying to smooth things out. "However, a more gradual transition, with proper notification, would be wise." "I've notified them." I said that I could no longer do extra shifts after I was diagnosed with pneumonia. I informed them that I needed to recover and reduce my workload. And instead of accepting this new reality, David and Beatrice chose a ski vacation and new furniture rather than financial security. They made this choice themselves. "That's Beatrice's version," he said, frowning. "This is not a theory. These are the facts. I have bank statements and messages confirming this." I didn't raise my voice, but my words sounded harsh, like a hammer hitting a table, and judging by the way he shifted from one foot to the other, I clearly felt that he wasn't used to being told no, especially with arguments. He looked away, and when he spoke again, his voice became a little softer, but no less purposeful. "Regardless of the details, the situation is causing significant stress to my daughter, which means to my wife, and, as a result, to myself. We celebrate Christmas at home, with the participation of a number of respected families. The last thing we need is for David and Beatrice to be distracted by financial worries. And here it is, the real reason for the visit is not concern for the well-being of the children, not sympathy for the woman who paid for 3 years of someone else's life, not the desire for understanding, but the fear that the festive table of the Parisi family would be overshadowed by the excitement of a late mortgage payment." "What exactly do you want from me, Mr. Parisi?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "I'm offering a compromise," he said, changing his tone to businesslike. "If you could temporarily resume mortgage payments, only until the end of the year, it would give them time to put things in order, perhaps sell the house, as you suggested." And why should I do this if I have already clearly stated that I put my financial security as a priority? Luigi, without answering, took a leather checkbook from the inside pocket of his jacket. I am ready to compensate you for the expenses. For the inconvenience, of course. For a moment, I couldn't think of an answer. And not because I didn't know what to say, but because I was amazed, really amazed at how easily he reduced my pain, my fatigue, my struggle for self-respect to inconvenience. His face did not show a shadow of doubt about the correctness of what he was doing. He really believed that everything was decided by money. Do you want to pay me to start paying off my son's mortgage again? I asked, not believing that these words had just left my lips. Think of it as a consulting fee, he said softly, uncapping an expensive, heavy pen. You're temporarily resuming payments, allowing them to maintain an appearance of well-being during the holiday season, and I will compensate you for your troubles. It's a simple business scheme, he said matter-of-factly, as if you were offering me participation in a corporate transaction rather than a financial substitution of concepts, where love is replaced by commitment and compassion by a schedule of payments. I stared at him, not immediately finding the strength to utter a single word, because the very idea that I was being treated as a function, as a source, as a mechanism that could be lubricated with money and it would work again, paralyzed me. This man, rich, confident in his rightness to the last button on his immaculate coat, who had never invited me to any family evening, was standing in my modest living room and essentially offering me a bribe to return to the role that had been destroying me for years. Mr. Parisi, I finally said, softly, but with a firmness that grew from the very essence of my accumulated experience. I am not interested in being paid for the maintenance of my own son. If you are really concerned about David and Beatrice's financial situation, perhaps you should offer them help directly. He was genuinely surprised, as if the thought had never occurred to him. It's not customary in our family, he replied after a pause. We believe in financial independence. The irony of this remark was so deafening that I almost laughed, not from amusement, but from the absurdity of what was happening. Financial independence, secured by a 60-year-old woman who works nights so that two 30-year-old adults can live in a house they cannot afford and arrange receptions for career benefits. His face became stern. I see Beatrice was right about your attitude. That is why we decided that it would be inconvenient to invite you to our Christmas meeting. Because I believe that adults should pay their own bills? I asked, feeling anger grow inside, even though I was trying to keep it within the bounds of politeness. Because, as you put it, I dislike your daughter's lifestyle, when in fact I just can't afford to be their bank anymore. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that when I lose my composure, I lose my position. Mr. Parisi, I'm not offended by Beatrice or her choice. I just can't afford to subsidize them anymore at the expense of my own health and financial security. He abruptly, almost defiantly, put the checkbook back in his coat pocket, as if this was the gesture that put an end to the conversation. Very good, he said with emphasis. I see that this conversation will not lead to a result. I will tell David and Beatrice that they will need to take other measures. I think that would be wise, I nodded. He turned, taking a step towards the door, but suddenly stopped, and, looking over his shoulder, said with that calculating expression on his face that I often saw on those who were used to getting everything without raising their voices, "You know, Angelica, can I call you that? Many parents would be grateful if their child married a representative of a family in our position. Such connections are invaluable." I didn't look away. And many parents, I replied calmly, expect their daughter-in-law's family to treat them with basic courtesy and respect, regardless of their social status. His lips tightened, but he couldn't find anything to say. He pulled on his gloves, buttoned his coat, and silently headed for the exit. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Parisi," I said, opening the door. He nodded without answering and disappeared into the darkness of the winter evening. When I closed the door behind him, I had to lean against it because my heart was pounding like I'd run a marathon. Everything that happened seemed surreal, from the way he appeared without warning to the suggestion he made, as if it were a rational and businesslike gesture rather than an act of moral violence. But that wasn't the most disturbing thing. The most disturbing thing was the realization that this was exactly how they all perceived me, not as a person, not as a mother, not as a woman with her own desires and vulnerabilities, but as a resource that could be spent, as an inconvenience when it ceases to be convenient, as a potential disgrace that must be hidden and excluded from the pictures of the festive ideal. I went into the kitchen and put the kettle on, hoping that the smell of tea leaves would give me a little homey feeling. While I was waiting for the water to boil, my eyes fell on the calendar on the wall, on the very day of Christmas, circled by me in red, when I still believed that I would spend this evening with my son. Now this day was a symbol of loneliness, but also of freedom, freedom from illusions, from dependence, from the need to earn love through money. And yet, as I stood by the stove, I felt a sense of doubt. Did I do the right thing? Should we have found a compromise, given them some time, allowed the transition to be softer? Am I punishing them by excluding financial support, like they excluded me from their holiday? The kettle whistled, interrupting my self-doubt, as if reminding me that life goes on, not in fantasies of reciprocity and gratitude, which did not happen, but in the present, where water boils, hands tremble, and you stand alone in the kitchen, learning anew to be for yourself. While I was making tea and covering the mug with a saucer to make the fragrance unfold better, I once again retold the facts to myself, as if rehearsing the truth that I had just begun to believe in myself. I had brought myself to pneumonia trying to preserve the illusion of well-being for my son. I had depleted my savings and jeopardized my pension, which I dreamed of an opportunity to finally live for myself. I was excluded from the Christmas dinner with the explanation that I did not fit into the company of his wife, and now, after all, I was accused of ruining their holiday. No, I didn't punish David and Beatrice. I just realized for the first time in my life that I deserved better treatment than what I've been conditioned to over the years. I was setting boundaries that should have been drawn many years ago. The phone rang, and the display flashed David's name. I slowly wiped my hands on a towel and picked up the phone, knowing that now they would try to convince me that they were wrong again. "Mom," he began without preamble, his voice clenched like a fist and trembling with contained anger. "Did you just turn down Luigi Parish's money?" So Luigi hadn't wasted any time and had already told him our conversation. "Yes," I replied calmly. "I refused the offer to resume the mortgage payment in exchange for compensation. Do you realize how humiliating that was for us? So that Sophia's father would have to come to you?" His voice was on the verge of breaking, and I closed my eyes, feeling the whole situation painfully twisted in his head. He really believed that the humiliation was in Luigi's visit, and not in the fact that his mother had to once again humiliatingly kneel before their comfort. "David," I said quietly, "if you're uncomfortable, it's because your father-in-law saw fit to interfere in your and Beatrice's financial affairs. It's not because I refused to accept the money to continue supporting you. He was trying to help." David exclaimed, resentment and anger mixed in his voice. "And you threw it in his face. Can you imagine how this will affect Sophia's relationship with her parents? They're furious. They're furious that I'm not going to keep working tirelessly to pay your bills," I repeated. "That sounds like inappropriate anger, don't you think?" "It's not just about money anymore," he said after a pause, a broken note in his voice. "It's about the fact that you're deliberately trying to ruin our holidays, our relationship with Sophia's family, everything." The words cut to the heart. He really believed it, that my decision to take care of myself, to finally put an end to the endless series of victims, was an act of hostility. "David, I love you," I said, choosing each word, "but I think you should take a step back and think about it. How would you feel if our roles were reversed? If I demanded that you work nights to pay my bills, and then told you that I wasn't inviting you to a party because you weren't suitable for my friends?" "This is different," he muttered, but his voice was less confident. "Parents, of course, help their children," I said softly, "but adult children should also become independent. And remember that respect for parents does not end when they stop paying the bills." He didn't answer. There was such silence that I heard a car driving on the icy asphalt outside the window somewhere on the street. "You don't understand," he finally said, but his voice had become colder, alien, somehow harsh and unfamiliar. "Good. Keep your money. Stay home alone for Christmas. I hope it's worth it." Before I could say anything, the line went dead. He hung up the phone. I put my phone next to a cold cup of tea and, for the first time in months, allowed myself to cry without holding back. not with quiet, lonely tears into my pillow after my shift, not in the shower where no one would hear, but the way one cries from the rupture of something internal, from the realization that everything that you believed, that everything that seemed unshakable collapsed and left only emptiness. I cried not only because of the harshness and coldness of the last conversation, not only because of the pain of rejection, but because of all the years spent in the fruitless hope that my efforts, my care, my dedication would someday be understood, accepted, returned at least with respect. I cried because of how imperceptibly, almost imperceptibly, our relationship turned from love and connection into convenience and calculation, as David and Beatrice lost the ability to see me as a person, and I lost the ability to remind them of it. I cried because I never taught my son the most important thing: gratitude, respect, love, not for convenience, but simply for what you are. The next morning, I woke up with swollen eyes, but with the feeling that my head, as if washed by crying at night, had become clearer, calmer, freer from the tangle of contradictions and tired attempts to explain to myself the actions of others. I couldn't control David's reactions, Beatrice's choices, or, even more so, the moral guidelines of the Parisi family. I could only control one thing: my own decisions, my feelings, and how I was going to move on, day after day, step by step, even if each step seemed timid at first and lonely. The first thing I did was call Eliza, and when I heard her joyful "Angelica, is that you?" I felt that simple warmth lurking in the voice of another woman, which I had not received for a long time from those who called themselves my family. "I wanted to know if your offer to join your family for Christmas dinner is still valid," I asked, trying to keep my voice simple and not betray my hidden excitement. "Of course. We will be glad to see you, dear. And please don't worry about bringing something fancy, just bring yourself." Her words were like a breath of clean air, light, comforting, sincere. After talking to Eliza, I dialed Dr. Ruggiero's office to confirm that I would definitely attend the hospital's Christmas party on the 23rd. The secretary immediately cheered up when she heard my voice. "Dr. Ruggiero will be thrilled. He specifically asked me to remind you to come." Finally, with an inner willingness that I may have been saving up for years, I called my sister Paula in Ohio. In recent years, we hadn't been close. The distance, the constant shifts, fatigue, and sometimes a banal unwillingness to talk about things that were difficult to formulate, all this kept us apart, but there was no reproach or awkwardness in her voice when she picked up the phone. "Angelica, what a wonderful surprise," she said, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something warm inside me respond to the word family. We talked for almost an hour. About what happened to her nephews, about her garden, about the weather, about the books we both read. When I briefly, in general terms, told her about what was happening with David and Beatrice, she did not condemn, did not rush to give advice, but her voice enveloped me with calmness and support. "It looks like you're finally taking care of yourself," she said, and there was no sarcasm or bitterness in those words, just tenderness and understanding. "In my opinion, it's about time. You've always been the person who gave everything until there was nothing left." I sobbed. I just didn't think it would come to this. That I would be excluded from Christmas. That my son would be mad at me for not paying his bills. Sometimes the hardest thing about motherhood is letting go. You taught David to walk by letting go of his pen. This is an adult version of the same thing, Paula said, and there was that wisdom in her voice that I lacked while I was trying to keep my adult son in a cocoon of sacrifice and help. "You know," she added towards the end of the conversation, "I was planning to visit Aunt Martha in Pittsburgh after the New Year. It's not far from you. Maybe I'll stay for a couple more days and we can spend time together." The idea that I would have the opportunity to sit at the table with her, talk, maybe feel like a sister again, and not just David's mother, touched me to the depths of my soul. "I would really like that," I said, and it was true. When I hung up, I sat in the silence of my living room for a long time, thinking about everything that had happened and everything that still needed to change. For the first time in many years, I made decisions based not on my son's needs or moods, not out of fear of rejection, not out of guilt or duty, but out of my own desires. I made plans with people who reciprocated. I set boundaries that were supposed to protect my physical and mental well-being. It wasn't the life I imagined when I was raising David and dreaming of a future full of reciprocity and family intimacy. But it was a life that I could now live with dignity. The way forward was not going to be easy. I knew that there would be new difficult conversations, perhaps new reproaches, new silence, and the pain of disillusionment would remind me more than once. But I was no longer ready to buy my son's presence in my life at the cost of my own health and financial security. I looked at the calendar, where Christmas Day was circled in red, a symbol of the unfulfilled, a reminder of what I hoped to see this winter. I took a pen, crossed out the red circle, and carefully wrote instead, Grace's, 2 p.m., dinner with Eliza. It wasn't the family holiday I once imagined, but perhaps it was the beginning of a new tradition not based on duty, fear, and financial obligations, but born out of respect, reciprocity, and simple human warmth. And that, I now knew, was enough. The Christmas party at the hospital turned out to be more elegant than I expected, much more sophisticated than I imagined when I reluctantly agreed to come, expecting a standard corporate meeting with plastic dishes and artificial garlands. The administration must have put their heart into this event. The normally sterile and businesslike conference hall was transformed beyond recognition. It shone with hundreds of soft lights scattered across the ceiling and walls, sparkled with silver and blue decorations, caught the light in every corner, reflected in glass pendants artfully imitating ice. The centers of the round tables were decorated with compositions of white roses and fresh pine branches, exuding a subtle, slightly tart scent of the winter forest, which even overpowered the smell of champagne and hot snacks carried on trays by polite waiters in black vests and snow-white shirts. A string quartet was playing softly in the corner, performing Christmas melodies as if each of them was new, without a touch of banality, with a slight nostalgic warmth. I spent a long time choosing what to wear, as if there was some kind of confidence formula in this choice. In the end, I took out of the closet an old but still immaculately fitting navy blue dress that I once wore to a charity event with Massimo. It kept alive the memory of those rare, bright evenings when I felt like not only a mother, not only a nurse, but a woman capable of shining. Adding a silver scarf to slightly refresh the neckline made me feel not just dressed, but ready. I was standing a little embarrassed at the entrance, hardly daring to take the first step into the crowded hall, when I saw Dr. Ruggiero walking towards me through the crowd, smiling sincerely, with warmth, which is rarely seen in a professional environment. "Angelica," he said, coming closer and taking my hand, "you look great. I'm so glad you could come." I smiled as I answered, "Thank you, Raphael. Everything looks amazing." To my delight, he offered his arm. "Let me introduce you to some people. Most of the administrative staff knows you only by reputation." I raised an eyebrow in surprise. "By reputation?" He grinned, "As the most competent nurse in cardiology and, by the way, the only person who can decipher my handwriting." I laughed, feeling the old stiffness recede, as if I were slowly removing an invisible but heavy veil that I had been holding on to for years. Over the next hour, Raphael confidently led me through the hall, introducing me to board members, administrators, and doctors from other departments, and more often I found myself feeling not embarrassed, but surprised. People knew who I was, remembered, thanked, and recalled cases in which my actions seemed mundane to me. As part of their work, they had a serious impact on the lives of their patients. "Dr. Patel is still talking about how you noticed a rare complication after a transplant last year," said one of the surgeons. "It may have saved a life." I blushed, not used to such explicit praise. "I was just doing my job," I replied. With exceptional skill, Raphael added with such firmness that I had to admit that it was not an ordinary compliment, but a sincere confession. With every passing moment, I felt the usual anxiety release, as the space of this hall, saturated with the warmth of live communication, became a refuge from the chaos of my personal life. Raphael was attentive, filling my glass on time, telling me where to go, and finding comfortable seats for us. When we sat down to dinner, he leaned over and said, "You seem different today." I smiled. "What exactly has changed?" He thought about it. "It's like you're present. You're usually full of tasks at work, as if you're already mentally on the next shift. And today you're here. You look into my eyes, you listen, you laugh." I nodded, feeling the words echo inside me. "I've made a few changes. I try to think more about myself." "It suits you," he said simply. After the main course, the general director of the hospital rose with a brief but sincere speech, thanking the staff for their dedication, hard work, and warmth, without which even modern medicine would be just a cold science. He announced that there were small gifts waiting for everyone at the exit, arranged in alphabetical order. Raphael and I went to the table with the boxes, and I found mine, elegantly wrapped in silver paper with a blue ribbon. "Open it," he gently encouraged. Inside was a beautiful leather notebook with my initials exquisitely embossed in gold on the cover, and a gift card to a local spa. I was surprised. Are these all such gifts? Raphael smiled slightly. Spa gift cards are standard. The idea of the magazines was mine, but perhaps I was being extra careful about yours. I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the champagne I was drinking. Thank you. It's very thoughtful, I said, and at that moment I realized that it wasn't the gift itself that touched me, but the fact that someone had noticed and remembered my words, spoken casually at night, between IVs and dosage schedules. "I remember you mentioned once that you kept a diary before life got too busy," he added. I thought it might be a good time to resume this practice. This fact, that he remembered such a casual comment I made many years ago during a quiet night shift, touched me to the depths of my soul and reminded me how little I was used to expecting attentiveness from others. When the party came to an end, Raphael offered to walk me to my car. The December night turned out to be cold but clear. The air was full of frost and freshness, and even the city lights did not prevent you from seeing the stars scattered across the sky like beads on velvet. We walked through the parking lot in silence, and in that silence, it seemed like something new had sprung up between us, fragile as frost on a branch, and at the same time surprisingly real. "I wanted to ask you something," he said, and in his voice I caught that barely noticeable vibration that appears when an adult decides to do something long, considered. "A chamber music concert will be held at the university next weekend. Would you like to come with me?" I stopped, really taken aback. "Are you asking me out, Raphael?" I asked, narrowing my eyes with a smile, trying to hide my unexpected excitement. He looked a little embarrassed, but he looked me straight in the eye. "I think so." "Is that inappropriate?" "I know we've been working together for years, but—" "It's not inappropriate," I interrupted gently. "It's just unexpected." He nodded, as if his confirmation of my words was a relief to him. "I've always admired you, Angelica. Your competence, your compassion, your quiet strength. I should have asked you this many years ago, but you've always seemed like such an inaccessible person, not only because of your schedule, but also, internally." I listened in silence, and a feeling stirred inside me that I once knew well, but had long since buried under piles of obligations, fatigue, and maternal worries. I thought about how for years I had built my whole life around David's needs, how I had pushed my own desires into the background, convincing myself that there would still be time for everything else, someday, later. I've missed so many opportunities for friendship, for joy, for simple human warmth, refusing to even notice them. "The concert sounds wonderful," I finally said. "I'll be glad to join you." A smile lit up his face, and for a moment he seemed much younger, almost a boy. "Great. If possible, I'll pick you up at 7. We discussed the details, and as he opened the car door for me, he hesitated for a moment, then leaned over and kissed me gently on the cheek. "Merry Christmas, Angelica," he said softly. "Merry Christmas, Raphael," I replied, feeling my cheek retain the warmth of his touch under his lips for a long time. As I drove home, my heart was pounding slowly, but with some new rhythm, not out of fatigue, not out of anxiety, but out of a light, almost youthful thrill. I couldn't remember the last time I'd allowed myself to just wait for a meeting, not because it was part of the schedule, but because it could bring joy. At the age of 62, I believed that the romantic chapter of my life had long been completed, that my role had narrowed to motherhood, to the role of a caring nurse, a conscientious employee, but not a woman capable of being loved. And now the very idea that something else might happen, a walk, music, and evening together, seemed both exciting and a little scary. As I drove down the quiet street, I noticed that the lights were still on in the house opposite, where Kiara Walsh lived. We had lived next to each other for so many years, but our communication was limited to occasional nods, greetings, and brief discussions of communal news. As with many potential friends, I've never taken a single step towards more, always rushing back to another responsibility. But today something has changed. On impulse, I parked the car, crossed the street, and without giving myself time to change my mind, I knocked on her door. Chiara opened it almost immediately, and genuine surprise was reflected in her eyes. "Angelica, everything is fine." I nodded, smiling. "Yes. It's all good. Simply. I've always admired your Christmas lights. They are so beautiful every year. And I was going to ask if you could teach me how to hang them at your place. If, of course, you have some time." Chiara's face lit up with unexpected joy. "With pleasure. Frank used to do this, but after his death, I mastered it myself. It's almost my passion now." She glanced at her watch. "Actually, it's not too late yet. We could at least make a plan. And I have hot chocolate." An hour later, Chiara and I were sitting at her kitchen table with empty mugs and a sketch of how we would decorate my house next weekend. What started as a conversation about Christmas lights turned into shared stories about our late husbands, our experiences living in the neighborhood, and our shared interest in gardening. "We should start a small gardening club when spring comes," Chiara enthusiastically suggested, patting the freshly painted garland scheme encouragingly. "I know at least 4 more neighbors who would join." "I'd like that," I replied, and was surprised to realize that I was really being completely sincere. "I've been thinking about redoing my backyard for many years now, but I just can't find the time for it, and, to tell the truth, not so much time as mental energy, because it was all spent on other people's worries." Chiara nodded understandingly, and there was not a drop of pity in her movement, only a warm, quiet agreement. "Life tends to fly by while we're busy with other things," she said, dropping her gaze into her cup. "After Frank's death, I just lived by inertia for 2 years. And then one day I looked around and thought, this is not life. It's just an existence. That's when I started saying yes to things. A community choir, a volunteer program at the library, even online dating, although it was a disaster." She laughed, shaking her head, and that laugh was clear, lively, somehow liberated. "Online dating?" I asked, not hiding my surprise, because I had never even allowed myself to think about such a thing. "Oh, yeah. Mostly terrible experiences, but there were some pleasant dinners with interesting men. No real connections, but it allowed me to get out of the house." She looked at me with a slightly sly interest. "Have you ever thought about dating again?" I shook my head. Between work, night shifts, David's mortgage, and everything else, this option never seemed possible. But actually, if I'm being honest with myself, I just agreed to go to a concert next weekend with a man, a colleague, who I liked and who made it clear that this was a special kind of invitation. Chiara clapped her hands enthusiastically, as if I had told her something particularly joyful. "Angelica Rinaldi, is this a date?" "I think it is," I admitted, feeling a long, forgotten warmth spreading in my cheeks. "Well, you can tell me all about it later. And if you need any accessories or want to hear a second opinion about your outfit, I'm right across the street." We both laughed, and it was that sincere, light laugh that brings us closer than the years of neighborhood. Later, when I was returning home, wrapped in a scarf, with a light snowflake melting on my cheek, I was amazed at how easily simple neighborly communication turned into what could well become a real friendship. And all because I allowed myself to stop, look around and hold out my hand, saying yes, not to the usual duty, but to something new, personal, needed by me. The next morning, I woke up with a feeling of amazing lightness, as if for the first time in a long time I allowed myself to take a deep breath, not holding back tears and not hiding my worries. I made coffee and, despite the December chill, went out with a cup to the back porch, where wintering birds were already bustling in the feeder, tits, sparrows, a single bright robin. The simple joy of that moment, the warm ceramics in my hands, the smell of fresh air, birds pecking at seeds, filled me with a warm, unhurried satisfaction unrelated to anyone's expectations or someone's happiness. It was just mine. And that was enough. I received a message from Eliza on my phone confirming the details of the Christmas dinner at her house. I answered gratefully, and then put the phone aside, deciding that I would not let potential messages from David or Beatrice disturb this quiet, peaceful morning. I didn't know if they would write. Probably not. Perhaps David's anger will overshadow everything else for a long time. But that wasn't my problem anymore. Later that day, I went to the local nursery, not for anything urgent, not on business, but just to buy myself a small live Christmas tree, which I planned to put in the window. In previous years, I either went to David and Beatrice's for the holidays, or I didn't bother with decorations at all if shifts fell out. This year, everything was supposed to be different. I wanted to decorate my house not for someone else, but for myself because I wanted to, because I deserved a holiday. When I was paying for the Christmas tree, a familiar voice called me. I turned around and saw Leon, David's childhood friend, approaching me with a warm smile, holding a box of garlands in his hands. Leon, always tall and a little awkward, with that same good-natured smile that hadn't changed since his teenage years, when he spent hours playing with David in our backyard, now looked older, more serious, with a slight streak of gray at the temples, but the same sparkle in his eyes spoke of a man who remained in a good way. The old one. Mrs. Rinaldi, it's been a long time. He embraced me in a friendly embrace, sincere and warm, without haste, as if we were old friends who had never lost touch, despite many years and rare meetings. How are you, Leon? What a pleasant surprise, I said, pulling back to get a better look at him. I'm fine, thanks. And you? What is it? He asked with keen interest, and his gaze slid over my purchase, a small, fluffy thing barely in the basket of the cart. I'm trying, I said with a smile, noticing how his eyes became thoughtful for a moment when he looked at my face again, as if catching something long forgotten in it. Are you still in contact with David? I asked, trying to keep my tone light, even though everything inside was already alert, expecting possible pain. A slight shadow passed over Leon's open, friendly face when he did not immediately respond. Not as much as I would like. We sometimes have lunch together when I'm in town, but... He paused. I leaned a little closer, gently prompting, but... Leon shifted uncomfortably, as if confessing something he would rather not say out loud. Honestly, Mrs. Rinaldi, everything changed after he married Beatrice. Our friendship is no longer the same. I've tried to keep in touch, but it's hard when... He paused again. When's what, Leon? I said, already knowing what I was going to hear, but wanting to give him a chance to finish. He sighed, like a man who has decided to be frank. When it seems that your value is measured by what you can offer them, socially, professionally. I'm not in the same social circle as Beatrice's friends, and I work for a small company that can't offer David the networking opportunities he seems to be focusing on lately. I nodded, feeling the familiar ache in my chest, the same one that came every time I tried to figure out how my son had strayed so far from the foundations that I had tried to lay in him from a young age. I understand that feeling too, I whispered, and Leon looked at me with sympathy. I heard that you won't be joining them for Christmas this year, he began cautiously. News travels fast, I remarked, wondering which version of events David had told him. He said something about you having other plans, Leon said, and then, in a slightly lower voice, he added, he also mentioned that you stopped helping them financially. I felt a brief, hot surge of anger that my son was discussing such personal matters with others, but swallowing my irritation, I answered flatly, yes, I needed to focus on my own financial security. Leon nodded with sudden seriousness. Well done, he said firmly. David was my best friend when I was a kid, and I will always take care of him. But the way he and Beatrice live, constantly going beyond their capabilities, constantly chasing after another status symbol, cannot last forever. It changed him. A confession from someone who knew David from the sandbox was both a comfort and a pain, and there was something cleansing about this duality. I keep hoping he'll figure it out before it's too late, I said softly, and Leon nodded affirmatively. He helped me carry the tree to the car, and after closing the trunk, he suddenly said, if you need help with the installation, I'll be happy to come in. My mom still has your address. That's very kind of you, I replied, touched by his sincere offer. I have to handle it, but it's a nice thought. Thank you. At parting, he unexpectedly hugged me, tightly and warmly. You know, Mrs. Rinaldi, David was always lucky to have a mom like you. Some of us have noticed it, even if he hasn't. I was driving home with a tree in the back seat and with these words ringing in my ears like a charm. It was a powerful reminder that not everyone in David's life looked at me through the same lens that he and Beatrice now looked through, as an ATM, a burden, an inconvenience. There were still people who saw me as a human being. There were still those who remembered who I really was. The next day, with Kiara's help, I decorated my house for the first time in many years. Nothing extravagant, white lights along the contour of the roof, garlands around the windows, a neat wreath with a ribbon on the door and a live Christmas tree standing proudly in the window as a symbol of a new chapter. But all of this transformed my humble home, filling it with light, warmth, and a sense of belonging. "We need to invite everyone to the party," Kiara said, stepping back to assess the result and wiping a snowflake from the tip of her nose. "And you should tell me more about this doctor who's taking you to the concert." I laughed, feeling a girlish excitement that seemed decades younger than my real age. "There's not much to tell yet. Raphael is the chief physician of St. Mary's Hospital. We have been working together for many years. And he's just asking you out on a date?" "Men can be so slow," Kiara teased, giggling and leaning towards me with a mischievous twinkle in her eyes. "Is he handsome?" "What is it?" she asked with a conspiratorial tone. "He's outstanding," I said thoughtfully, allowing myself to express my admiration sincerely for the first time in a long time. "He has kind eyes and a kind smile, which reflect so much understanding and attention that it is impossible to feel unnoticed in his presence. He was widowed. There are no children." "A doctor without children and with kind eyes sounds promising," Kiara remarked, meaningfully wiggling her eyebrows, making me laugh again and feel a long, forgotten feeling of joyful anticipation in my chest. "I haven't been on a date since I met Massimo," I confessed, lowering my eyes. "I'm not even sure I remember how to behave." "Just be yourself," Kiara advised, patting my hand with such ease and support, as if it were the most natural decision in the world. "This is always the best approach. And remember, he's probably just as nervous as you are." Her words sounded so calm and confident that, despite my inner excitement, I felt the uncertainty go away, giving way to interest in the future. The day of the concert came, and I found myself spending an unusually long time on my appearance. I tried on 3 different outfits before settling on a rich burgundy dress that I bought many years ago and never put on, as if unconsciously putting it off for a case that never came. I carefully arranged my hair, more carefully than usual, applying light makeup, almost a forgotten touch to myself, as if I was remembering who I was before I dissolved into the role of a mother, widow, employee. When Raphael arrived at 7 a.m. sharp, his approving look told me that all my efforts had not been in vain. "You look great, Angelica," he said, and there was genuine warmth in his voice. "Thank you." "You're very handsome yourself," I replied with a slight smile. He was wearing a dark gray suit, immaculately fitted, and his tie barely matched the shade of my dress, as if they were meant to be together. The concert took place in a small but elegant concert hall at the university, a chamber space with impeccable acoustics, where the sounds of a string quartet spread through the air like a touch to the soul. The program included music by Schubert and Dvořák, filled with subtle emotional depth, and while these notes were playing, I felt the tension of the last months go away, leaving only silence inside and lightness because I simply exist in the present moment, among sounds, light and quiet presence next to the person who sees me. During the intermission, Raphael and I took a leisurely stroll through the university art gallery adjacent to the hall. He asked, "Do you like the performance?" "Very much," I replied sincerely. "It's been too long since I've been to a live concert." He smiled, and there was a sparkle in his eyes. "I admit that I had ulterior motives when I invited you. This quartet holds a series of chamber music concerts throughout the year, and I was hoping to find someone who would like to attend them all with me." The hint was transparent and perhaps deliberately careless, but there was hope in it, not for a fleeting evening, but for a gradual, unhurried building of something real. "Maybe they'll convince me," I replied, and Raphael's smile became even softer, as if my yes had turned out to be more than he expected. After the concert, he suggested dinner, and we went to a cozy Italian restaurant hidden in an old brick house nearby. Over pasta, fresh bread, and a glass of rich wine, we talked casually, freely, as if there had never been those years that flew by while I was living in service to other people's needs. We talked about books and music, about politics and reforms, about life and change. When he asked if there were any places I dreamed of visiting, I answered almost immediately, the Greek islands. Massimo and I had planned to go there for our 30th anniversary, but he fell ill, and the trip remained a dream. Raphael nodded, his gaze darkening for a moment. We had similar plans for Ireland. After her death, I couldn't bring myself to go there alone. But lately, I started thinking that maybe it's time. I looked at him with sympathy. What has changed? I asked. He thought about it, then said, I realized that by not going, I had not honored her memory, but had frozen myself in the past. I defined myself as a widower, as a man who had lost his love, but not as a man capable of experiencing joy, making plans, and feeling again. And at that moment, I realized how similar we were, two people who had gone through a loss, allowed their lives to narrow down to functions and responsibilities, but now finally dared to straighten their shoulders and look around again. He looked at me directly. What about you, Angelica? What has changed recently? At the Christmas party, you mentioned that there had been some changes in your life. I hesitated, not knowing what to share on the first date. But there was something in Raphael's open, unbiased expression that encouraged honesty, a kind of gentle confidence devoid of importunity, as if he understood the importance not of words, but of the silence between them, and therefore did not rush, did not force, did not push. I've reviewed my priorities, I said carefully, trying out a new wording for myself that sounded like a confession, like the first step in my own justification. For many years, I have built my life around my son's needs and desires, often to the detriment of my own well-being. Recently, I had to admit that this approach was not healthy for him, much less for me. Raphael nodded encouragingly, not insisting on details, allowing me to talk only about what I was ready to reveal, and it was this tacit respect for boundaries that led me to be more open. I brought myself to pneumonia by trying to stick to a schedule that allowed me to financially support my son and his wife, I continued, feeling how these words, not for the first time uttered, still hurt, but no longer torn apart. When I got sick and asked for a temporary postponement, their response. It was the first time I saw it. Our relationship had long since become unbalanced, where giving on my part had long since ceased to meet at least some form of gratitude. It must have been painful, Raphael said softly, and in those few words there was no superficial sympathy, only deep, sincere understanding. And so it was. That's right, I admitted, sipping my wine and gathering my thoughts, which I wanted to express correctly, not from pain, but from a clearer consciousness. The most difficult thing was to accept the fact that the closeness that I thought we had turned out to be conditional. It depended on my willingness to be an eternal source, supplier, and not on love or affection. When I set boundaries, when for the first time in many years I put my own needs first, everything changed. Silence, distance, reproaches, indifference. Raphael leaned a little closer, his voice almost a whisper. Setting boundaries with adult children can be incredibly difficult, especially if you have been in care mode for a long time. That doesn't make you a bad mother, Angelica. The question is, does this make me a bad mother? He broke free before I could stop him, slipping out like a naked nerve, like something that lay deep in my insecurity, at its very center. Raphael's reaction was immediate and firm, of course not. In fact, I'd say that's what makes you a good mother. One that shows her son an example of healthy self-care, reasonable boundaries, and self-respect, even if he doesn't understand it right now. His words were calm, but they hit the nail on the head, as if he spoke them on behalf of all those years when I was silent, patient, waiting for gratitude, and received only expectations. His confession, expressed without platitudes, without condemnation, but with firm kindness, relaxed in me what had remained compressed for years. The rest of the dinner was spent in a light, almost homely atmosphere. The conversation turned to lighter topics, and Raphael humorously told funny stories from hospital life, many of which, despite years of work, I had not heard. I laughed, not feigningly, not politely, but heartily, and perhaps this was the first time in a long time that I laughed so easily. Later, when he drove me home and, like a gentleman, escorted me to the door, I felt the tension of the entire evening dissolve into this simple gesture of attention. I had a great time, Angelica, he said, standing close enough that I could feel his warmth, the scent of his cologne, and the silence that wasn't awkward. Me too, I replied, feeling like a woman on the threshold of not only her home, but also something new, warm, promising. I'd really like to see you again, he said with a slight hesitancy that I hadn't expected from him. Shall we have dinner next weekend? Unless it's too early. It's not going to happen anytime soon, I replied, and he smiled and then slowly bent down. I didn't back down. On the contrary, I leaned forward, and our lips met in a kiss, light as a snowflake on my cheek, but it left a thrill all over my skin. Good night, Angelica, he whispered. Good night, Raphael, I replied, entering the house, where every window illuminated by a Christmas garland now seemed to be part of a new life. But as I walked through my familiar rooms, now softly lit by the Christmas lights that Kiara had helped me hang, I realized that this was not someone else's life. It was mine, finally going beyond the narrow limits that I had accepted for so long. I was still smiling the next morning when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Beatrice's number, which was unusual enough to make me think. Over the years of our acquaintance, Beatrice rarely called me directly, preferring to leave communication with me to David. Curiosity won out, and I replied, "Hi, Beatrice." Angelica, her voice was trained in controlled emotions. "I think we need to talk." "Okay," I said carefully. "I'm listening." "Not on the phone," she said quickly. "Could we meet for a cup of coffee today, if possible?" The request was so unexpected that for a moment I wondered if it was some kind of trap or manipulation, but Beatrice's voice sounded genuinely upset, not calculating. "I could meet you at the cafe on Main Street at noon," I suggested. "Great. Thank you. See you then." She abruptly hung up, leaving me staring at my phone in confusion. What could Beatrice want to discuss with me in private that couldn't be said over the phone? And why the urgency? I spent the whole morning feeling both curious and apprehensive about the upcoming meeting. Beatrice and I have never been close. Even in the early days of her relationship with David, she always maintained a polite but distinct distance, treating me with the careful politeness one might show to a helpful but slightly embarrassing relative. When I arrived, there were a lot of people in the cafe. Holiday shoppers were looking for escape from the cold. Beatrice was already sitting at a corner table, with a cup of something untouched in front of her. She looked up as I approached, and I was amazed at how tired she looked. There were shadows under her eyes, and there was tension around her mouth, which I hadn't noticed before. "Thank you for coming," she said when I sat down across from her. "Can I get you something to drink?" "I'll get it myself in a minute," I replied, putting down my purse. "Beatrice, what's going on? You sounded upset on the phone." She looked around the cafe as if looking for familiar faces, then leaned forward slightly. "David doesn't know that I'm dating you," she said softly. "And I'd rather he didn't find out." My anxiety increased. "Is everything okay between you two?" "No," she said bluntly. "It's not okay. That's why I'm here." She took a deep breath, then continued, "Angelica, I need to ask you something important, and I need you to be completely honest with me, even if the truth is hard to hear." I nodded cautiously. "I'll try. Did you know about gambling?" The question caught me off guard. "Gambling? What? Gambling?" Beatrice studied my face intently, then seemed to deflate slightly. "You really didn't know? I was afraid you were covering for him all this time." "Beatrice, I have no idea what you're talking about," I said firmly. "What kind of gambling? Are you saying that David has a gambling problem?" She closed her eyes for a moment and then opened them with a determined expression on her face. "Yes. I found out about this about 2 years ago when our credit card was declined at a restaurant. When I checked our account, there were dozens of transactions on online betting sites, poker rooms, and bookmakers. My mind was spinning, trying to make sense of this revelation. Did you run into him?" "Of course. He swore that it was just a hobby that got out of control and that he would give it up immediately. He seemed so genuinely remorseful that I believed him." She laughed bitterly. I was an idiot. So he didn't stop, I said, starting to see more clearly a picture I hadn't wanted to or couldn't grasp before. Maybe it was like that for a while. But about 8 months ago, I noticed that the same pattern was repeating itself. When I expressed my displeasure to him this time, he got angry, took a defensive position, said that I was overreacting, that he had everything under control, that his investments would cover any temporary deficits. Investments? I repeated, remembering David's vague references to financial strategies and opportunities he was supposedly considering. Beatrice nodded grimly. Non-existent investments, just another lie to cover their tracks. She paused, taking a sip of the already cold drink. After the second confrontation, he became even more secretive. He started using accounts that I didn't have access to, took cash advances from credit cards issued only in his name, and perhaps did something else that I couldn't even imagine. What about the mortgage payments that I make? I asked, feeling a heavy, viscous nausea build up in my stomach. Money for a credit line secured by housing? Beatrice nodded, her eyes fixed on the side, as if she couldn't bear to be stared at directly. Some of this money really went to our needs, she confessed. But the main amount, she stammered, and then, lowering her voice to a whisper, finished, it went on betting, on debts that he had already accumulated by that time. He was gambling with the money I earned by working overtime, I said, and the realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Yes, she said faintly. I'm so sorry, Angelica. I should have told you sooner. I was too embarrassed, too proud, and, frankly, too scared of what would happen to our lives, our status, if the truth came out. I leaned back in my chair, and it took me a few long breaths to realize the scale of this deception. Late sleepless nights, which, according to David, were caused by work crises, urgent requests for money that could not wait a day, vague explanations about where the previous amounts had gone, all of this suddenly took on a new meaning. Terrible, holistic meaning. How bad is it? I finally asked. Beatrice's eyes filled with tears. It's bad, she admitted. The mortgage is already overdue for 4 months, not the one you knew about. We are facing confiscation of our property. The credit line you recently paid off, he's already signed up for a new one behind my back. My credit cards are exhausted, and my car is in danger of being seized. Does he admit that he has a problem? I asked. She shook her head with such an unhappy look that I felt humanly sorry for her. He still insists that he will get everything back, that he has a system, that this is just a difficult period. Classic drug-addicted conversation. I've been studying this issue. He says he was just unlucky. That everything will change soon. What about your parents? I asked a question that has been in the air from the very beginning. They would certainly have helped if they had known the situation. Beatrice's expression hardened instantly. They can't know, she snapped. My father will disown me. Gambling is something that he considers absolutely unacceptable. His own father was an avid gambler and lost the family business before my father rebuilt it. If he found out that I married a man with the same problem, she didn't finish the sentence, just pursed her lips. So that's why you're so concerned about your appearance, maintaining a lifestyle despite financial difficulties, I said, and the pieces of the puzzle finally began to add up. Beatrice looked down at her hands. I know what it must look like for you, new furniture, a trip when you're working hard to pay the mortgage. But the furniture was bought on credit. Until recently, I didn't even know how bad it was. And the trip to the ski resort was mostly paid for by my parents as an early Christmas present. I couldn't refuse without arousing suspicion. It took me a while to process everything that Beatrice had shared. The resentment I felt towards her subsided a little when I realized that she, in her own way, had also become a victim, not so much passive as scared, dependent, drawn into a circle of innuendo and fear. Why are you telling me all this now? I finally asked. Because I'm on edge, she confessed, her voice trembling. Last night, David returned home just after 3 o'clock in the morning. When I confronted him, he didn't deny it. He just confessed that he had lost another $5,000 at a casino outside the city. We have absolutely no money. She took a shuddering breath, clearly trying to keep her composure. I told him that he needed help, that he needed to join Gamblers Anonymous, and that he needed to talk to a therapist. He refused. He said that I was exaggerating, that every successful man has setbacks, that his parents, that is, you, would help us out again if necessary. The careless entitlement in that statement, the assumption that I would just step in to cover his gaming losses, made me boil over. When I pointed out that you made it clear that you would not provide him with any more financial support, he became ugly. He said something I never thought he'd say. Beatrice's voice became even quieter, almost weightless. He hinted that if I had been a better wife, more supportive, more like the women in my family's social circle, he wouldn't have had to escape through gambling. Anger flared up in me because of the emotional manipulation that David used. It's typical behavior of an addict, Beatrice, I said quietly but firmly, to blame others for your own decisions. She nodded. I know that now, she whispered. But that doesn't make the pain any less real. She looked at me, and her expression was more open and vulnerable than ever before. Angelica, I do not know what to do. I'm afraid. Not only the financial collapse, but also who David is becoming. Lying, manipulation, anger at any counteraction. It's like living with a stranger wearing my husband's face. At that moment, I saw behind the impeccable appearance that this union has always created, behind the desire for social stability and approval, a frightened woman facing the destruction of her family, her financial support, and her hopes for the future. Have you considered breaking up? I asked softly. Every day for the last week, she confessed, her voice trembling, but there were already echoes of determination in it. But I'm terrified of what's going to happen next. How to tell my parents about this, how to deal with the social consequences, how to start all over again at the age of 32 with a mountain of debts that I didn't even accumulate. I reached across the table and took her hand, a simple but sympathetic gesture, and we both marveled at its naturalness. Beatrice, I can't tell you what to do, I said, but I can tell you that I've recently realized that it's never too late to put your well-being first, set boundaries, and choose a healthier path, even if it scares and seems unclear. She squeezed my hand, her eyes moistened, but gratitude shone in them. That's exactly why I wanted to talk to you. You seem different lately, stronger, more determined. I admire the way you defended your position, despite the pressure that David, me, and my parents put on you. I admitted that it wasn't easy. But it was necessary. I think I need to find the same courage, Beatrice whispered. I can't go on like this. Constant anxiety, lies, the feeling that I'm living in someone else's constructed life, where everything is fragile and shaky. She looked at me with a directness that was somehow cleansing. Angelica, I'm sorry that I treated you like this. How dismissive, how aloof, how I didn't recognize the sacrifices you made for our family. I was so focused on impressing my parents, on maintaining my outward success, that I lost sight of what really matters. The apology, unexpected and seemingly sincere, resonated in me with a gentle hesitation, like a pebble thrown into water, calming something inside that had been trapped for so long by pain, resentment, and fatigue from loneliness. Thanks for saying that, I said. It means a lot. We sat in silence for a while, letting the words settle like dust after a long wind, and the festive bustle continued to reign around us, with muffled voices, the light clink of dishes, and the smell of cinnamon and roasted nuts. What are you going to do now? I finally asked. Beatrice squared her shoulders, a new determination reflected on her face. I made an appointment with a therapist who specializes in addiction issues that concern me, not David. I need to understand why I allowed such behavior, why I put appearance above reality for so long. I nodded encouragingly. That sounds like a positive step. I'm meeting with a financial advisor next week to figure out exactly what we're up against and what options might be available. She hesitated, then added. I also started looking at apartments, small ones, in areas where my parents would never go, in case I needed a retreat strategy. If you need help with any of this, I'm here. I heard genuine sincerity in my voice, and I was surprised at how easy and honest it sounded. Despite everything, Beatrice was still a part of my family. She was still connected to me through David, and at this moment she showed courage and self-awareness, which I did not expect. Thank you, she said, and her eyes sparkled. It means more than you think. She glanced at her watch. It's time for me to go. David will be wondering where I am. When we got up to leave, Beatrice hesitated and then impulsively hugged me. I'm really sorry, Angelica, for everything. I know, I said, hugging her back. And Beatrice, whatever you decide to do, make sure it's the right thing for you, not something that will please your parents, or preserve your appearance, or even save your marriage. You deserve a life free from fear and deception. She nodded, blinking back tears. I'm starting to believe it. After Beatrice left, I stayed in the cafe, ordered a coffee that I didn't really need, and just sat there, giving myself time to process everything I'd heard. The story of David's addiction, with his debts, lies, manipulations, all this has exposed our past in a new, disturbing light. How long has this been going on? How deeply did my financial support, what I considered an act of love and maternal duty, actually feed his destructive habit? I felt a cold realization growing in me with each question. Perhaps it was my desire to save that became part of the problem. And what now? Will I be able to be there when he finally recognizes the problem? And won't I destroy myself again by letting pity get the better of my mind? Is it possible to support without getting involved? Is there a love in which boundaries remain inviolable? These questions haunted me as I sat by the window and watched passers-by scurry down the street with holiday packages in their hands, as children make snowballs, and shop windows glow with garlands and promises of comfort. And yet, despite the disturbing thoughts, there was a strange but firm clarity somewhere deep inside me. I knew that the boundaries I had set were not only timely, they were life-saving. Not just for me, but maybe one day for him. Sometimes love does not manifest itself in catching a falling person over and over again, but in stepping aside and letting him learn to stand. I finished my cold coffee, got up, thanked the waitress, and went out into the cold, sparkling air, feeling my steps become lighter, as if the determination in my heart had given me a new reason to move forward. Christmas Eve has arrived. The sky was covered with soft clouds, and light snow began to fall softly on roofs, trees, and cars, turning the familiar streets into a postcard. I spent the morning in the kitchen, as I did when I was a child, inhaling the aroma of molasses, cinnamon, and orange peel. The old recipe for ginger cookies that my mother baked every Christmas became for me a way to connect the past with the present, to pay tribute to tradition, but also to add a new note to it. The next day, a familiar fragrance filled my kitchen, evoking memories of long-gone holidays when David was a little boy and enjoyed the simplest traditions. I was wondering how he spends Christmas Eve. Had Beatrice told him about our meeting over coffee? Was he preparing for a lavish celebration at the Parisians, or was he somewhere else, completely fueling the addiction that Beatrice had told him about? The phone rang, interrupting these thoughts. It was my sister Paula. "Merry Christmas, Barb," she exclaimed warmly, "just stopping by to see how you were doing." "Actually, I'm fine," I replied, realizing with a slight surprise that it was true. Despite the ongoing situation with David and the revelations of his gambling addiction, I felt more at peace than at any time in recent years. "I'm baking my mom's ginger cookies." "Oh, I can almost smell them through my phone," Paula sighed nostalgically. "Do you remember how she let us decorate them with that awful colored sugar that stained everything around?" I laughed. The memory was vivid and pleasant, and Dad pretended to be annoyed, but actually ate the most. "Those were good days," Paula said softly. "Speaking of family, is there any news from David?" I hesitated, not knowing how much information to share. Paula and I have become closer in recent weeks, but I have not yet told her about Beatrice's visit and David's gambling addiction. "It's complicated," I finally said. "I've learned some disturbing things about David's situation." "What kind of things?" Paula asked, her tone becoming sharper with concern. I took a deep breath and told her everything. Gambling, Beatrice's secret meeting with me, the scale of their financial problems, which went far beyond what I initially realized. "Oh, Angelica," Paula said when I finished. "I'm so sorry. It's devastating." "That's right," I admitted. "But, oddly enough, it also clarifies the situation." The boundaries I set were necessary not only for my financial security. Perhaps they were the only thing that could bring this problem to light. After hanging up with Paula, I finished packing the cookies, and then decided to take a walk around the neighborhood to enjoy the snow and the holiday decorations. Fresh air will help me clear my head before my evening plans. Kiara joined me, wrapped in a red coat with a matching scarf. This year, Jensen's house has surpassed itself, she commented as we passed a house with an intricate light display synchronized with music. Their electricity bill must be astronomical. But it's beautiful, I said, admiring the shimmering spectacle. Well, Kiara playfully nudged me. Are you ready for a big date on Christmas Eve? I felt a surge of excitement. Raphael invited me to dinner at his house, which was a significant step compared to our previous outings in public places. I think so. I bought a new dress yesterday. Look at you, Angelica Rinaldi. A new dress, a holiday romance. I barely recognized my former neighbor, who only worked at work, not having fun. I laughed, but there was some truth in her teasing. In the weeks that have passed since I set boundaries with David, I have begun to regain those parts of myself that have been dormant for years. My love for music, my interest in fashion, my ability for friendship and, yes, even for romance. Raphael is a good man, I said simply. He makes me feel valuable. Raphael lived in a tutoring-style house in one of the old neighborhoods near the hospital. When I arrived that evening, he greeted me with a warm smile and an approving look, which made me glad that I had splurged on a new emerald green dress. You look absolutely gorgeous, he said, taking my coat. Please come in. Dinner was served in the formal dining room with candles and beautiful setting, which, according to Raphael, bothered him. I haven't had much fun in years, he confessed. I was afraid I'd forgotten how to do it. Everything is perfect, I assured him. And so it was, from the perfectly cooked steak to the carefully selected wine and the flickering candlelight that softly illuminated everything around. I have to admit, Raphael said while we were enjoying dessert. He confessed that the rich chocolate cake was from a bakery located nearby. I've been wanting to invite you to dinner for years. Years? I repeated, surprised. Why didn't you do it? He smiled broadly. A combination of factors. First, professional boundaries. The difference in our positions at the hospital made me hesitate. And now you're in an administrative position, which creates a more appropriate balance. But more importantly, he added, and his expression became even more serious, you seem more accessible. That's not quite the right word. Perhaps this is more common in your life. I nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. I was trapped in a vicious circle of worries, in which there was no room for anything or anyone else. May I ask what has changed? I was thinking about what information to share, and decided to be honest. Necessity. I brought myself to pneumonia by trying to stick to a schedule that allowed me to financially support my son and his wife. When I got sick and asked for a temporary reprieve, their reaction made me realize that for years I had been indulging in behaviors that were not healthy for any of us. He listened in silence, with that attention that speaks more about sympathy than any words. When he took me home later, our goodnight kiss was less timid than before, more confident. It was a warm, gentle exchange of touches that lasted sweetly and carried the promise of something more. Merry Christmas, Angelica, he said softly in my ear, hugging me goodbye. Merry Christmas, Raphael. Thank you for a wonderful evening. In my house, I walked through the familiar rooms with a sense of satisfaction that seemed both new and profoundly right. A small live Christmas tree twinkled in my front window. Artfully hung Kiara street lights cast a soft glow on my porch. And now Raphael's thoughtful gift, a volume of Mary Oliver poetry, was waiting on my bedside table so I could study it in more detail. As I was getting ready for bed, my phone rang, alerting me to a text message from Beatrice. Can we talk tomorrow? It is important. David found out about our coffee meeting, and things escalated. I need some advice. My heart sank. So much for a peaceful Christmas day. I answered quickly, sure. What time would suit you? She replied immediately. If possible, early, at 8 a.m. I can meet you at your place before David wakes up. Christmas morning turned out to be clear and cold. The early sun reflected off the fresh snow. Beatrice was standing on my porch at exactly 8 a.m., her face pale and haggard, dark circles under her eyes indicating that she had not slept well. "Thank you for meeting me," she said as I escorted her inside, "especially today." "Of course," I replied, leading her into the kitchen, where there was already hot coffee, the aroma of which filled the room with an enveloping comfort, as if the atmosphere itself was trying to soften the harshness of reality. "What's happening?" "Your text sounded urgent." "David found out about our meeting. Someone saw us in the cafe and told him." Her voice was tired but determined. "He accused me of betrayal, said that I was only interested in controlling him in order to make him look bad. As if that would solve anything now." "What did you tell him?" I asked, without taking my eyes off her face, looking for signs of fatigue, fear, or vulnerability. "That I won't do it. Even if you had agreed, and I told him it was highly unlikely, it would only have contributed to his addiction." Beatrice placed the coffee mug on the table with such care, as if she was afraid it would break with a single touch. "That's when he really lost control. He started throwing things, shouting, smashed 2 plates, a glass. I waited until he left, packed my bag and spent the night at the hotel. I need to stay somewhere temporarily. Just for a few days, until I talk to my parents and figure out what to do next. The hotel is expensive, and I need to be careful with the money right now." I froze for a moment, realizing how much the dynamics of our relationship had changed. A woman who had recently avoided communication now asked me for shelter. "The guest room is small," I said softly, "and nowhere near as elegant as the one you're used to, but you can stay there as long as you need to." Relief showed on her face. "Thank you, Angelica. Honestly. I promise I won't bother you." While she was unpacking, I quickly called Eliza and explained that I needed to reschedule Christmas dinner. But, as always, Eliza not only refused to cancel the meeting, but also insisted on bringing dinner to me. No one should be alone at Christmas, especially if there is someone nearby who is going through hard times. "I'll be there around 4 with a meal. And I'll take Kiara with me, her children couldn't come this year." Around noon, the doorbell rang insistently. When I opened it, I saw David with a sinking heart. His face expressed a mixture of despair and anger, unbalanced sparks flashed in his eyes. "Where is she? What is it?" he demanded, not bothering to greet her. "Is Beatrice here?" I went out onto the porch, closing the door firmly behind me. "David, this is not the way to deal with what's going on between you and Beatrice." "So she's here," his voice became sharper. "I knew it. She totally turned you against me, didn't she?" "I filled your head with lies." "No one turned me against you," I said, trying to stay calm despite my increasing heartbeat. "But she needs space right now. And I think you should respect that." He laughed bitterly. "Space? It's more like an escape. Did you know that she's in debt too? That she spent as much as I did, while everything seemed fine?" "David," I raised my hand to stop the flow of accusations, "you need help. Real, professional help. It's not an investment, it's an addiction. And she's ruining your life and the lives of those who love you." His face paled, but his eyes remained hard. "I don't have an addiction. I just had a bad period. It will pass." I sighed, feeling the pain settle heavily on my chest again. "It's not temporary. And until you admit it, no one can help you." We stood against the backdrop of a Christmas wreath sparkling with golden lights, in a paradoxical silence in which each of us understood that this was a turning point. In David's eyes, I saw a war that was raging between a desperate drug addict looking for another fix and a son who, somewhere under the chaos of addiction, still respected his mother enough to listen to her words. I looked at him, at this grown man with the shadow of the boy I once comforted after nightmares, stroked his hair when he had a fever, who once said that I was his hero. "I think you should leave," I said quietly but firmly, not wanting to escalate the tension, but also not intending to give in. "Come back when you've calmed down and you're ready for a real conversation about helping." Real help. He stepped forward, his face white with anger. I'm not leaving until I talk to Beatrice, he almost shouted, and I saw his fingers clench into fists. Yes, you will, I said, not moving. This is my home, David. I'm asking you to leave him. If you refuse, I'll have no choice but to call the police. He froze as if I had hit him. A mixture of surprise and pain flashed in his eyes. Would you call the police on your own son? On Christmas Day? I don't want to, I confessed, feeling my chest tighten, but I will do it if it's necessary to protect everyone, you, Beatrice, and myself. He stepped back, as if the impact of my words had just caught up with him. His shoulders slumped. Good. I will go. But tell Beatrice that it's not over yet. She can't just walk away like it was all a game. What do you mean, David? Are you threatening her? I asked sharply, and he froze in fright. I'm not threatening. Simply. She doesn't understand how everything is connected. Financially. Legally. We have common obligations. I stared at him in silence, and it suddenly seemed to me that he was a man lost in his own lies, his own excuses, so confused that he could no longer distinguish between truth and fiction. I'll tell her you stopped by, I said calmly. And you think about what I said. For help. He turned to leave, but suddenly he looked at me again, and his voice became quiet, almost childish. Merry Christmas, Mom. I'm sorry about what happened. I'm sorry too, David. I love you. And I will always love you. But I can't support behavior that harms you and others. When I closed the door behind him, there was a tense silence in the house. I turned around and saw Beatrice standing at the foot of the stairs, her face pale, her eyes red. I heard everything, she whispered. I'm sorry you had to go through this. It's not your fault, I replied. You are not responsible for his actions. He's an adult. Did you really mean what you said, that you would call the police? Yes, I said simply. Sometimes love is not about holding on, but about being able to let go. And set the boundary. This is not a betrayal. It's a concern. Her eyes filled with tears. Thank you. For standing up for me. For giving me a place where I can feel safe. I reached out my hand and squeezed it gently. You're part of my family, Beatrice. We don't choose the circumstances, but we can choose how to respond to them. And I choose to be there. She nodded slightly, her face softening. I guess I've never said this before, but I really respect you, Angelica. Later, when evening came, and the aroma of fresh pastries and pine needles was already in the house, Eliza arrived, as promised, with boxes of food, followed by Chiara, with apple pie and her inexhaustible cheerfulness. I thought that you would need not just dinner, but the warmth of a real Christmas, Eliza said, laying out the dishes on the table. Half an hour later, Raphael joined us, bringing a bottle of champagne and a huge cake from a local bakery. I thought we needed something sweet to celebrate being here together, he said, handing me the cake with a kind, sincere smile. An amazing group gathered at my table that evening: Chiara, my cheerful neighbor, with whom I had only recently started to be friends, Eliza, reliable and kind, Raphael, whose presence brought peace and confidence, and Beatrice, who survived perhaps the most difficult Christmas of her life, but still found refuge, support and, possibly, a new point of reference. However, despite the unusual circumstances, or perhaps precisely because of them, the meal was filled with warmth, sincere communication, and moments of unexpected joy. Beatrice, at first quiet and withdrawn, like a fragile porcelain figurine, afraid of any careless touch, gradually brightened up, as if thawing under the soft, friendly light of a lamp, and by the end of the evening she was laughing with us, allowing herself the spontaneity and lightness that in her former life seemed to be an unacceptable luxury. She laughed at Chiara's stories, which, despite the tragicomic nature of their content, were told with such sincere self-mocking brilliance that laughter at the table broke out in waves like a fire in a fireplace after a log was thrown. You should have seen this guy, Chiara said, fiercely waving a fork on which an olive could no longer hold. He wrote in his profile, trekking, fitness, active lifestyle. I came to the coffee shop stained with ketchup and with a breath that could light a fire from a distance. Beatrice covered her mouth with a napkin, stifling laughter, and I noticed how Raphael looked up from his glass of wine, and there was something more than just benevolence in his gaze. There was a soft, warm spark in which sympathy and admiration could be discerned, and that subtle possibility of the future that does not frighten but it's encouraging. When dinner was over and we were lazily leaning back in our chairs with the remains of dessert in front of us, Beatrice looked up from her cup and, as if gathering her courage, asked if she could call her parents. "I think I'm ready to talk to them," she said softly, and I just nodded, surprised and touched that she felt it necessary to ask permission in my house. "Sure. Do you want to be alone? The office is free." She left, and returned about 20 minutes later with slightly swollen eyes from crying, but with an expression full of a strange but deep relief. "They're coming tomorrow," she said. "They want to see me. To talk in person." And how did they react? Better than I expected. Her voice was a little hoarse, but confident. "They are shocked, of course, especially the father. But he said he was proud of me for finally not pretending." When the guests began to gather, when Eliza was drying her hands and collecting containers, Chiara was wrapping the leftovers of the pie, and Raphael stopped to help me carry the glasses to the kitchen, I felt something I hadn't felt in many years, not longing for the departing ones, but quiet gratitude for their presence. After I saw them off, closing the door behind the last guest, I stopped in the silence of the living room, looked around the room, where the smell of cinnamon, wine, and candle wax still lingered, and thought about how much my life had changed over the past 6 weeks. I, Angelica Rinaldi, a woman who not so long ago was exhausted to the last breath, always at work, always in debt. Today I hosted at my table those who became my new support, by choice, and not by duty. The situation with David, of course, has not been resolved. His addiction was serious, destructive, and required help, which he has so far rejected. Beatrice was still caught up in the maelstrom of legal proceedings, fighting for financial independence and emotional integrity. And I knew that my involvement in their lives was not over yet, that difficult conversations, compromises, and choices were waiting for me, in which there would be no simple solutions. But now I knew the main thing: I could remain myself. I had the right to say no, if it did not protect my dignity and inner peace. 3 months later, on the day when spring first reminded me of the smell of wet earth and the sound of melting water, I was standing in the backyard of my house, among the beds that I had dug myself, surrounded by people who had become almost family during this time. Chiara explained how to properly prune basil, Eliza planted tomatoes, Beatrice carefully transplanted mint and rosemary into new pots, and Raphael moved the wooden grate that we had painted the day before to the fence. Beatrice, who had moved into her own apartment but remained a frequent visitor, was carefully planting herbs in a tall garden bed that we had built together. Her divorce proceedings were in full swing, complicated by David's continued financial irresponsibility, but continuing nonetheless. She found a job at a marketing firm in the city, far from prestigious, but stable, with a team where she was perceived not as an ornament, not as a continuation of the name of Parisi, but as an independent, intelligent, and capable woman, and gradually, step by step, Beatrice began to build a life on her own terms, albeit without luxury, which she was used to, but also without the fear she had lived in for so long. Free from the constant strain of maintaining a facade, free from the obsessive need to conform to standards dictated not by her heart, but by someone else's ambitions. David, after another fall, much more devastating than all the previous ones, finally agreed to rehab, and as he later told me on the phone, it happened when he gambled everything to the bottom, including the money that Beatrice's parents, in a desperate attempt to give him one last chance, lent him for opening a modest consulting business. His recovery did not go smoothly. There were breakdowns, accusations, bitterness, and retreats, but there was also a desire, albeit shaky, albeit slow, but still real. He didn't ask me to return to paying his debts. He called to tell me about the group sessions, about phrases that remained in my head after long conversations with the curator, about childhood memories that suddenly surfaced with a new, frightening clarity. I was listening. I no longer paid for his mistakes, but I was there for him, as a mother, as a witness that love does not mean blind acceptance, but it does not disappear, even when forced to retreat. As for me, after much thought, conversations with Raphael and Paula, and sleepless nights filled with quiet reflections, I finally applied for retirement. My life at St. Mary's Hospital lasted for decades, from the moment when I, a young, hopeful graduate, entered the department for the first time, clutching a diploma still smelling of printing ink, to the moment when, tired but still strong, I turned off the bedside lamp for the last time. Now I came to the cardiology department only on Fridays, as a volunteer, in a white coat without a badge, talking to patients, reassuring anxious relatives, passing on my little medical secrets, honed by time, to younger colleagues. The rest of the days I devoted to the life I had been putting off for so long, trips with Raphael, whether it was short trips to neighboring cities or a planned trip to Italy, painting lessons, where I was surprised to find that I could see colors differently than before, Sunday calls to Paula, where we laughed, remembering our youth, or quiet evenings with a book and tea, when nothing was dragging me back into the debt pit of other people's decisions. I no longer paid David's mortgage, but I gave him and myself something much more valuable, a chance to build a life based on honesty and dignity, on new beginnings, where relationships are built not on need, but on mutual respect. That evening, as Raphael and I sat on the porch, watching the sunset turn our garden golden, as the light wind stirred the greenery we had planted with our own hands, he took my hand, and there was more than just tenderness in his touch. There was confidence, appreciation, and a deep, mature love. "Do you know what I admire most about you, Angelica?" he asked. "What is it?" I smiled, expecting another joke or a warm compliment. "Your courage. Not just to survive difficulties, but to change their meaning. To rise from them not as a victim, but as a person who has chosen life as it is, without embellishment, but the real one." I just squeezed his hand, feeling her squeeze mine gently in return. "It's never too late to become who you were meant to be," I said. I finally figured it out. A year after Christmas, which was a turning point, I stood in a small room of the community center in front of a group of people whose faces I already knew by name, by their stories, by the pain reflected in their eyes. It was a support group for families facing gambling addiction, and today it was my turn to tell my story. "It's not easy to love an addict," I began, feeling my chest tighten with memories. "Especially when that person turns out to be your child, the one you raised, protected, hugged, sheltered from all the storms. But sometimes true love requires you to step aside. For you to say no. So that you would not give help, but a chance. The chance to fall, and get up yourself." What I didn't realize was that my financial support wasn't really helping him. It was his conniving behavior that destroyed him from the inside, allowing the habit of showing off, living in debt, and running away from reality into the illusory world of betting and promised winnings to take root and germinate like a dangerous weed that displaced everything healthy and sustainable. An elderly man sitting in the back row wiped away a tear, and there was so much recognition and pain in this simple gesture. His wife, strong and statuesque, with neatly styled gray hair, shared her story during one of the previous meetings, about how their daughter lost everything, home, family, job, before, literally on the street, she finally admitted that she needed help. Then, as now, they both seemed not so much broken as tired of the endless struggle between love and common sense, between the desire to save and the need to retreat. I looked again at the circle of these people, different in age and experience, but united by one truth: addiction destroys not only those who are mired in it, but also those who stand next to it. The most difficult decision I've ever made was to stop paying off the mortgage, to let my son face the consequences of his actions, I said out loud, slowly, almost in a whisper, as if entrusting the group with something particularly personal. It felt like betrayal, as if I'd let go of his hand at the most dangerous moment. Everything in me, every mother cell, screamed that I must intervene, must protect, must save. But now I know that the most loving thing I could do was not to interfere, to let him fall so that he could want to get up. After the meeting, a woman in her 50s came up to me with a strained smile, clutching her purse tightly to her chest like an armor. Her eyes, anxious and full of inner struggle, looked at me as if they were looking for an answer in my face that they could not find either in themselves, in books, or in countless advice from friends. "My son hasn't spoken to me for 3 months now," she confessed, her voice trembling. "Since I refused to become a guarantor for his new loan. I keep thinking, what if I made a mistake? What if it was the only chance? I gently put my hand on hers, a gesture that was both sympathetic, supportive, and firm. I wish I could tell you that it's going to be easier, I said. But the truth is that recovery, like love, is a process that does not consist of victories and defeats, but of repeated choices. And sometimes the hardest choice turns out to be the right one. Setting boundaries is not cruelty. It's an act of faith. The belief that a person is capable of growing. Self-belief. The belief that you deserve peace. Her eyes filled with tears, and without hiding them, she whispered, "Thank you." I needed to hear it. We said goodbye, and I went outside, breathing in the cold but refreshing late winter air, and for the first time in a long time I felt that my place was right here, next to others who choose the path not of simplicity, but of awareness. It's been almost a year since that fateful Christmas. David hasn't played for 6 months now. He attends meetings of anonymous gamblers, works with a financial advisor, slowly and painfully sorting through the rubble of debts and promises. Sometimes he calls, and in his voice I hear not the old boy in need of rescue, but an adult man trying to learn how to be honest, at least to himself. Beatrice, who filed for divorce in October, rented a bright apartment overlooking the river, opened a small marketing agency and, according to Eliza, began dating an accountant named Thomas, who, according to the description, seemed reliable, restrained, and extremely patient. We have dinner almost every Sunday, and every time I wonder how a true friendship based on the recognition of vulnerabilities and a common path can be born out of mutual distrust. Even Luigi and Laura Parisi, who have stood on the pedestal of social approval for so long, have changed. After the shock, after the anger, after the collapse of the illusion of an ideal son-in-law, they became more attentive to themselves, to their daughter, to others. They started coming to the same meetings, where they shared stories of shame, fear, and remorse. Luigi even started financing rehabilitation programs at the city hospital, and when I asked why, he answered simply, "Because now I know that it can happen to anyone. Even with our children." As I approached the house, I noticed Raphael clearing snow in the driveway. As I approached, he raised his head, and that warm, familiar smile appeared on his face, which made my heart beat faster anyway, no matter how many months it had been since we started calling each other our own. "How was the meeting?" "What is it?" he asked, carefully leaning the shovel against the garage wall, and without thinking, I reached for his gloved hand, feeling that simple but important warmth that makes two people truly present in each other arise between our palms. "Okay," I said, and most importantly, she was important. "I think it helped some people." "I have no doubt about it," he replied, squeezing my fingers gently but confidently. "You know how to give hope without simplifying reality. It's a rare gift." We walked towards the house, walking in unison, like people who have long been accustomed to being around each other, in silence and in conversation, in ordinary everyday life and in crucial turns of fate. Our breath formed clouds in the cool air, and the newly fallen snow creaked under our feet. Through the large window of the living room, I saw a Christmas tree, sparkling with lights, and neatly stacked gifts under it, not expensive, but chosen with care. This year, the festive table will once again bring together all that incredible, diverse company that has become my family not by blood, but by choice. David and Beatrice, together for the first time since their divorce, although no longer as spouses, but as people who have learned to be honest with each other. Eliza and her husband, who have arrived despite her busy schedule. Chiara, carrying another pie and her constant wit. My sister Paola, who this time was bringing with her a man with whom she seemed to be starting something real. "I was thinking about our conversation yesterday," Raphael said as we were already shaking snow off our shoes on the porch, and there was that subtle, almost boyish note of excitement in his voice that I hadn't heard from him before. "About the trip to Sedona?" I asked, remembering our plan to spend a spring week in Arizona, walking through the red canyons and watching the desert bloom. "No," he replied, and his face became focused, "about the house." I meant what I said. I think we should do that. Sell both houses and buy something new together. Shared space. A shared future. I froze for a second, not from fear, but from the realization of the depth of the step. He wasn't just offering a move, he was offering a life together in its entirety, with its logistics, daily routines, rituals, and habits. I think you're right, I said, surprised at how calmly and confidently those words left my lips. The time has come. His face lit up with such sincere, almost youthful joy that I wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. Really? Are you sure? Yes, I replied, touching his cheek. This year I realized that the best solutions are not those that seem obvious, but those that frighten, but attract, opening up space for real intimacy and growth. He took my hand and we went inside, into my house, which was soon to become our common stepping stone, not an anchor holding us in the past, but the foundation for moving forward. The past year has been a year of fractures, healings, losses, and rebirths. I lost my illusions, but I gained reality. I gave up the role I'd been living in for decades in order to finally get into my true self. Giving up the financial support that I had served for my son for years was not the end, but the beginning of new connections, new choices, a new life in which I was neither a shadow nor an auxiliary figure, but the main character. I looked at the Christmas tree, at the soft light in the windows, at the footprints from our boots leading to the threshold, and I knew that this life, with all its imperfections, difficulties, and triumphs, was mine, chosen by me. Tomorrow is a new day. Perhaps it will bring news, difficulties, and questions that I do not yet know the answers to. But I'm here today. In a house full of light, next to the person I love. And there's nothing inside me but gratitude, for the path, for the strength, for the chance to start anew, and, most surprisingly, for taking it. Write a comment on what you think about this story and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like it. See you soon.